Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Natalie Jeck-Torowitz, and I'm president of the District 34 Board of Education. Before we continue, I just want to give everyone a brief preview of tonight's meeting. As is our usual custom, we will first take care of some routine business. We'll hear from Dr. Deli during superintendent comments and then proceed to public comments. I'd like to bring everyone's attention to our new procedure for community participation. Anyone wishing to address the board will now be able to do so directly as a live participant. You will still need to complete the form found on our website, and when your name is called, you will appear on the screen as a Zoom panelist. All other rules regarding time and decorum will still be observed, and I will outline those in greater detail when we get to that point in the agenda. After comments, we will begin a discussion about considerations for the district to move into an adapted in-person model. I anticipate that topic will take up the majority of tonight's meetings. So let's get started. As always, I'm joined by my fellow board members, Jim Baumstark, John Hagee, Katie Jones, Mike Corman, Scott Nelson, and Diane Stefani. Also joining us tonight is our administrative team, including Superintendent Dr. Dane Deli, Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, Dr. Matt Silverman, Assistant Superintendent for Business Services, Eric Miller, Executive Director of Human Resources, Dr. Heather Hopkins, Executive Director of Student Services, Mary Garrity, Executive Director for Instructional Innovation, Brian Engel, Director of Communications and Strategic Planning, Kathy Kajigian, Director of Operations, Steve Ruelli, Director of EL Bilingual Programs, Raquel Kim, Assistant Director of Student Services, Kristen Caceres, District Nurse, Kathleen Lean, and our Board Recording Secretary, Katie Siegel. So the first section on our agenda tonight is approvals, and we have two items for consideration. The first is approval of tonight's agenda. Board members may have a motion and a second to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved. Diane Stefani.
Second, John Hagee.
Oh, we have a tie there. We'll go with John. I think John was first. So this is a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Next, we need a motion and a second to approve the January 25th, 2020 regular and executive board meeting minutes as presented. May I have a motion and second?
So moved. Katie Jones.
Second, Jim Baumstark.
Again, this is a voice vote, so all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. So that brings us to the communication portion of our agenda, and we will begin with superintendent comments, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Deli.
Thank you, Natalie, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our meeting this evening. I did want to take this opportunity to extend some very special thanks and recognition to Mr. Steve Ruelli, our Director of Operations, and his team of custodial and maintenance staff who have worked so hard to manage all of the snow in the past couple of weeks. The people you see outside plowing and snow blowing and shoveling and salting are the same people we see inside of our school buildings, making repairs and keeping our buildings as safe and clean as possible. We don't have a service. We don't have separate people that just come in and do snow removal. It's the same people, and they've literally been doing a lot of heavy lifting. And so thank you to all of you for the hard work, especially during this rough few week period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it, Dr. Deli?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, just want to make sure. All right, so that brings us to the first of two opportunities for audience comments tonight. Again, anyone wishing to address the board can submit their comments using going through our district website, and our Director of Communications, Kathy Kajigian, will read your name and connection to the district and then bring you on Zoom. Please make sure that your full name is visible on the Zoom because Kathy needs to be able to find you among all participants. As is always the case, you will have 3 minutes to speak, and You will get a 30-minute warning if necessary before you hit the 3-minute mark, after which point we'll have to move on to the next person. Because this is your opportunity to be heard, the board will be in listening mode only. The board or administration will follow up either via email or by posting information online if appropriate. We understand that by bringing people on screen, we are adding a new dimension to our virtual meeting. So we remind all speakers to please conduct themselves with respect and civility as outlined in Board Policy Section 2, subsection 230 and Section 8, subsection 30. We all hear each other and communicate better when we show one another respect and a measure of grace. So having said that, I'm going to ask Kathy, are we ready for our audience communications?
Yes, we are. And the first speaker is Laura Coleman, parent of current District 34 students. Laura, I am going to bring you on to the panel.
There we go. Sorry. Okay, hi. Hello. Can you see me?
We see a picture of you.
Oh, that's a very nice picture of me too. Hold on. There we go. Hi. Not so nice now. But anyway, hello, everyone. Good evening, board members. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Laura Coleman Brehart. I have 2 kids in the district. And I hope that everyone watching, and I hope you guys are doing well. I hope your roofs are holding up better than the peat moss I'm calling my own. It's like a lake in there. Anyway, so there's a lot of feelings in the district right now, lots of feelings. And I understand both sides of the reopening debate. However, I would caution against this whole, the private schools are doing it, so we should too mentality, because there are probably a couple of reasons why the private schools have been able to move into a full-time in-person model. And it wasn't any magic wand they waved or any code they cracked. They threw the dice and gambled just as much as anybody else did. They just happened to, I think, get pretty lucky. And I think that it has something also to do with what I'm calling herd community. See what I did there? That's when a larger community does things in a certain way to protect a smaller community, because their student bodies are so much smaller than ours. I mean, we're talking hundreds to our thousands. So I don't know that it's a necessarily accurate rubric to use the private schools as this, torch or this hill to die on as far as coming back. So I just want to make sure that we do everything safe. I'm sure that all of you on the board have been thinking about this tirelessly, and I'm not going to sit here and say you haven't, because I know you have. I know that you care about our community. I know you care about our kids. So just Godspeed. I'm privileged. I get to stay home. So either way, I'm okay. My kids will be okay, but that's not the case for everybody. And I understand that. So I wanted to put that out there too. But anyway, I'm not going to take up any more time. Thank you so much for letting me speak. I'm very nervous. And I will hopefully see some of you in person soon. So have a good night. Please take me off the camera.
You did great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. Kathy, who's next?
Okay, next is staff member Sarah Lund.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Lund, and I'm an associate at Pleasant Ridge and the new president of the Glenview Professional Association. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you tonight. From my personal experience, thanks to the actions of our administration and the board, I can report that things have been working well this year in the buildings during what would otherwise be a very difficult year for education. The current conditions in our buildings provide us the best opportunity to continue to do our jobs safely with the fewest interruptions. I would like to raise some concerns I have on behalf of our members, should the board decide to bring back all of our students for a full day of learning for the remainder of the school year. Our staff has been able to keep the CDC recommended guideline of a 6-foot distance between themselves and students while in the classroom. With a full classroom of kids, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for these standards to be maintained. while also being able to properly support our students. To go along with that point, another concern would be having students eat lunch in the buildings. Associates provide supervision for lunch and recess at most, if not all, of our schools. Having a full classroom of kids eating without masks will not only put the students at risk, but also the support staff that needs to be supervising them. The current hybrid model minimizes, if not completely eliminates, these risks. Finally, our custodial staff has time in between morning and afternoon groups to sanitize and prepare our buildings for students and staff. Without that break in the day, it will be more difficult for our custodians to maintain the current safety standards that are in place. Thank you all for your time and your work you've put into keeping our staff and students safe this school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Kathy, who's next?
We have Erin Merningham, who is a parent of future District 34 students. Erin, I'm bringing you on.
Erin, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So at our last meeting, it was mentioned that an algorithm was used as a scientific basis for determining whether to open our schools. I would now like to thank Dr. Deli for his transparency in confirming that there is no such algorithm. That is because details matter. They most certainly matter when the children of District 34 have not been in full-time in-person schools since March of last year. Details matter when the majority of adjoining townships like Wilmette, Winnetka, Northbrook, Morton Grove are open for full-time in-person learning. And details matter when the surrounding counties, such as Lake, Kane, DuPage, and Will, are open for in-person learning at a higher index than Cook. They also matter when our surrounding states of Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Missouri are all open for in-person learning at a greater index than what we are experiencing here in District 34. And I would like to ask the board, how is it possible for the Des Plaines Rivers Casino to be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and District 34 cannot figure out how to open for safe in-person learning full-time for those that want it? Perhaps they are just better at fine details. And I will say it again, as many others have said before, the 6-foot distancing recommendation is just that, a recommendation. And I again point out that the World Health Organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Harvard and Brown experts, and the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine support 3-foot distancing when masks are being used. As board members with a close pulse on these topics, I am sure that you have read this information. And if not, I am more than happy to provide further resources and sources to this information. Per the most recent CDC report, emergency rooms have seen a 24% increase in mental health related visits from children aged 5 to 11 compared to last year. The increase among older kids is even larger. Per Brown University's Bueno, looking at individual level information at all public schools, students and teachers throughout Georgia from 2007 to 2016, he found that ever attending a virtual school is associated with a 10 percentage point reduction in the probability of ever graduating from high school. For the most recent census, the national average spent per pupil for elementary and secondary education is $12,000. District 34's average is $16,000. I point all of this out as we are at almost 35% more funding per student than the national average. Our district should be open and there should not be any blockers. I am truly shocked to be sitting here today having to say us when there are 3 weeks away from a year of these children having last stepped foot into District 34 for full-time in-person learning. I truly hope that you will all either dig deep to make in-person learning happen in 2021 or find someone who can, someone who will not take no for an answer, find a way to turn these children to their previous state of normal to mitigate any further detrimental impact to their development. And this is a reminder that details matter. Every day matters when it comes to these children's education, careers, and lives. Details matter. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Erin. Kathy, who's next?
Next, we have Dr. Dana Russo. Give me 1 second. Here we go, Dr. Russo.
We can't hear you, Dana. I think you're muted. Dr. Russo, I think you're muted.
All right. I will,
Can we come back to Dr. Russo?
yes, absolutely. All right, I'm going to send her back to attendee. Dr. Russo, I will bring you back at the end. So next we have Nisha Patel. Okay.
Nisha, I think you're also muted.
Can you hear me?
Oh, but it's echoing.
Can you hear me?
Am I the only one who's hearing an echo?
Yeah, Nisha, I think you had 2 devices logged in.
Yeah, sorry, one of
Yep.
my kids. All right. Hi, I'm Nisha Patel. I'm a primary care doc in the area, and my husband's an ER doc. So we're well aware of what's happening. I just want to thank you guys for all that you're doing. Our board, our administration, and our teachers, we're very grateful. I have actually a few questions. So how does D34, and I don't expect answers right now, but how does D34 interpret 6 feet when feasible with the IDPH guidelines? And what does when feasible mean if not feasible, what are D34's plans to get the kids back to more in person? Is it 5 feet or is it 3 feet with barriers? Second question, why are some public schools in the area, are they doing 3 feet with barriers when we've kind of heard that it's IDPH guidelines that we're following? Next question, D34 has made accommodations for kids with IEPs. Is D34 making any accommodations for households where both parents are essential workers working outside of the home, such as doctors, nurses, grocery store workers who have 0 option for work from home arrangements? And 2 more questions. Why is D34 not utilize larger areas such as cafeterias, gyms to adequately space out students if the 6 feet is the barrier? And the last comment, WHO, CDC, and American Academy of Pediatrics have all come out in favor of maximizing in-person learning and outline methods when 6 feet are not possible with classroom layouts, barriers, and setups. So has D34 implemented any of these or kind of looked into options? So those are my comments. I just wanted to thank you.
All right, thank you, Nisha. Kathy, who's next?
Next is Jacqueline Deppen. And I am not finding her in the attendee list.
Kathy, there is a Jacqueline
Jacqueline, yep,
in
okay.
the attendee list as a guest.
Yes, I'm going to hope that that's our Jacqueline. If not,
this Jacqueline can talk for us.
Jacqueline, did I get the right Jacqueline? Are you Jacqueline Depp?
Hi, this is Jacqueline Deppen. Thank you.
Great.
I appreciate, first of all the hard work. I just have one question, and it really evolves around transparency and metrics. There's a lot of talk about what we can do to get kids back in the classroom. Overwhelmingly, what I am seeing and feeling and hearing is secondary to me to understand how the kids going back to in-person learning is going to happen. So I would like to know precisely what the board is using and doing to what needs to happen in order for the kids to be back full time. Is it just the 6 feet distance per the IDPH guidelines that do say when feasible, or is there something more? If it's something more than just the 6 foot distance, then what exactly is it that needs to happen to get our kids in full time?
All right, thank you, Jacqueline. Stay tuned.
Okay.
Kathy, who's next?
We have Scott Steele.
Right.
All right, Scott. Okay, here, Scott.
Yeah, Scott, you're muted.
Is that better? Am I sideways or right side up?
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Anyway, I thought I had my camera on. Yeah, so I don't have a scripted statement or question. The previous caller or previous person kind of basically asked the question I was about to ask. I mean, it's pretty simple. I just want to know what data or what facts the district is using to justify not fully reopening schools. I mean, there's been states that have had schools open for months now. You know, a previous caller mentioned private schools can't be used as a litmus test or a comparable because it's small student population, but there are private schools all over the country that have been open for months. There are public schools in different states that have been open for months. I have yet to read one documented case of a teacher who was transmitted the virus from a student who's died from it. There's just no data supporting keeping the school, you know, partially closed, zero. My son in Glenview is in school, full in-person school. So if they can do it, then District 34 should be able to do it. I just don't understand the rationale. And I just like to fully better understand what facts or data the district is using to keep schools partially closed still. It just doesn't add up to me. And I wish I would, you know, I'd hope that the district could be transparent with all the parents and give the parents the choice on whether to send their kids back to school full time or not. If parents aren't comfortable with it, they can keep their kids at home. That's what the high schools are doing. So that's pretty much my question, just a summation or a collection of previous questions. Thank you.
All right, Scott, thank you. And again, stay tuned. Kathy.
Next is parent Liz Lapp. Got her.
Hi. I am a parent who has a first grader at Lyon and a fifth grader at Pleasant Ridge, and I just had two comments. One is I'd like to know why the schedule hasn't changed for Wednesday all remote learning. Excuse me. While I understand the change to do a late start, that was last year before the pandemic. And so I'd really like to know why there isn't consistency for our children to add the additional 2 hours per week. So the kids are in 5 days per week and there's more consistency. I really believe this would be a positive change for our kids. So that's my first comment. The second comment is what support is going to be in place to help the growing number of children who are struggling with mental health issues because they've been learning at home for the last year. I want to know what the plan is for next year for these children transitioning back to the classroom setting. My daughter is leaving fifth grade and going into sixth grade, and that is a huge transition. And I want to know that the district has a plan for these kids who are struggling at home, learning at home, and they just need some support. So I want to know what the district is going to do for them. Thanks so much for all your hard work.
Thank you, Liz. Kathy, who's next?
Okay, next we have Kathleen McNeila. I have a W McNeila, so hopefully that's a shared account, and I will bring that person on. I hope I get this right. Did I get the right person?
Yes, yes.
Okay, Kathleen, thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry. Are you able to hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. First of all, a sincere thank you so much to the board for your hard work. I would just be interested in information about district summer academic programs to fill in the gaps that have resulted from e-learning. I don't see anything on the district webpage or district communications thus far. We would just like to budget for private tutoring costs for a couple of kids if the district is not providing summer learning opportunities. So any information will be appreciated. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kathleen. Kathy, who's next?
Next is Kim Adams, parent. I don't have a Kim Adams. I have a Kim, but I have a few Kims.
Is there any way we could maybe move on and ask Kim Adams to somehow identify herself among attendees?
Yeah, Kim, if you could maybe log out.
Kathy, I'll work on it. I can work on the side with like who I think it is if you go on to the next one.
Okay. Next is parent Tracy Kellner. All right. Tracy, here you come.
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry.
We can hear you. And
Hello.
now we see you.
Hi, everyone. Don't look at my hair. I just want to thank the board and the staff of District 34 for everything that they're doing to keep our kids safe and for the snow removal, of course. We've had so much snow. I have 2 kids in the district, one in middle school and one at Glen Grove, one being in special education. So she's in school for more time each day. Just a couple things. I do trust the board and the administrations to keep our kids safe. I feel that it's really hard to compare us to the districts surrounding us and the private schools around us. We have a lot more students than they do. And as the CDC is recommending the 6 feet apart, I can't even imagine how you could get all the kids in the building without keeping the 6 feet apart. I also just backing up to, I think it was Liz that had talked about the Wednesdays at home e-learning. It's really difficult for the kids, especially with IEP, to go 2 days in, 1 day off, and then 2 days back in. These kids need a lot of structure, so it would be nice to get back into school on Wednesdays, even if it is that 2.5 hours, 3 hours. But again, thank you, and I do support what the board and the district votes on and how they come about for next year. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Tracy. Kathy, have we found Kim Adams?
We did not. I did not, Kathy.
Okay.
I think she said something about in chat. She identified herself in chat, in the chat box.
That was me. That was me.
Oh,
I asked if I went to confirm if it was, and I did not get a response.
Okay. Well, let's move on.
Okay.
Next.
Then we have William Chapman.
Okay.
All right. Here we go.
Hello. I just wanted to say thank you for moving kindergarten up to 4 days a week. It's been, I mean, this is, I guess, will be the first week that we got to do it because of the snow last week. But I am very excited, and our kids are super thrilled. And all the other parents that we've spoken with are also very happy to have kindergarten being back in school 4 days a week. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Will. That was short and sweet.
And then that is it for this
No,
participation.
you want to go back to Dr.
Yes.
Russo.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing, Brian.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Russo, let's try this again.
Well, I see you're still on mute. Oh, there we go.
Good.
Hi, sorry about that from earlier. I just want to say good evening and thank you guys so much for this opportunity. And we are pleased with everyone's progress and kind of moving forward with the students. I just have a couple of comments and questions I think that have been reiterated by some of the other parents as well. I'd like us to still consider and keep the discussion open about bringing all students in full time for their education and keep them distanced at 3 feet apart and masked. Like we've heard before, the CDC, the World Health Organization, American Academy of Pediatrics clearly state that this is only a recommendation to keep kids at 6 feet distance when feasible. They also advise to strongly consider the negative impacts on children when keeping them in remote learning versus in-person learning by strictly adhering to this recommendation. I personally reached out to the Illinois State Board of Education with this concern, and they responded, and I quote, "Districts have the flexibility to create and implement plans based on the needs of their community. And I am hopeful that you guys will hopefully consider these recommendations and move forward to 3 feet distancing with masks in the school." My second question and concern was around the Wednesdays as well. Why are we still keeping kids fully remote on Wednesdays? What body of evidence supports this ongoing decision? As far as my knowledge knows, there is no other business or medical models in the area that closes fully for 1 day a week for a hard cleaning. This is also not a CDC, World Health Organization, or American Academy of Pediatric recommendation. We should be giving our children every opportunity for in-person learning and solving for logistical challenges. Lastly, as a physician and a parent, I strongly support full-time in-person learning. It's time for our students to do what the rest of our community has done for months and figure out a way how to get our children in school full-time. I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to us moving forward. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Russo. I'm glad we were able to get your comment in, and thank you to all of those who registered to be a Zoom panelist and make a comment. We will have another opportunity to do so later on in our agenda after our discussion. Before we get to our discussion section, we have to do a little business. We have to take care of our consent agenda, otherwise known as consideration of resolution. These are items that are either routine in nature or things that have already been discussed by the board. We have 6 items on consent tonight. We have Resolution 2150, the personnel report, 2151, approval of payroll warrants, 2152, approval of vendor warrants, 2153, board executive session recording, 2016 to 2018, Resolution 2154, board policy issue 106 for action, and 2155, playground capital replacement plan for the intergovernmental agreement. Board, may I have a motion and a second to approve tonight's consent agenda?
I so move, Mike Corman.
Second, Jim Baumstark.
And this is a roll call vote. Katie Siegel, may I have a roll call? Katie, I think you're muted.
Corman,
Aye.
Heggie,
Aye.
Nelson,
Aye.
Stefani,
Aye.
Jack Torowitz,
Aye.
Baumstark,
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. So
Natalie, do you mind if I just make a couple of comments before we get into the discussion items regarding the personnel report?
go ahead.
So thank you. 2 items from the personnel report I would like to briefly highlight, and that's by welcoming both Mr. Kevin Dorkin and Mrs. Kate Ellison to new roles, administrative roles in District 34. Kevin has been a long-serving principal at Lyon Elementary School and will now join the district office administrative team as the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, succeeding Dr. Heather Hopkins, who will be retiring at the end of June. Also, Mrs. Kate Ellison will be joining District 34 as the next Glen Grove principal, succeeding Mrs. Helena Venna, who will also be retiring at the end of June. Kate has served as a principal in the Evanston-Skokie District 65 for the last 11 years, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome both of these administrators to their new roles starting July 1st. So thanks for the opportunity for letting me highlight that.
Well, let me add the board's welcome and congratulations to Kevin and to Kate. And we look forward to seeing both of you at the board table, whether virtually or in person. So congratulations. Well, since there are no other resolutions for consideration tonight, we will move into the discussion portion of tonight's meeting. We begin with the presentation put together by our administrative team at the request of the board. With COVID cases dropping and new CDC guidelines issued, the board has asked Dr. Deli to explore whether we are ready to move from our in-person hybrid phase to the adapted in-person model of the plan that we approved back on July 27th of last year. And that is going to be the basis of our discussion tonight. So I'm going to now just turn it over to Dr. Deli. He and his team have put together quite a in-depth presentation. After that, I'm going to be opening it up to board questions, comments, and the like. So Dr. Deli.
Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, and as Natalie indicated, you will hear and see several of us presenting different facets of the presentation with you this evening. I think it's important, just because this is an important opportunity, to once again just emphasize the fact that the teaching and learning that has been taking place in the district this year has really been made possible because of the hard work of our students, our parents, our teachers, our support staff, our administrators, and this Board of Education. We are well aware of different opinions relating to the teaching and learning that we've been able to provide thus far this year, but the fact is what we've been able to do is really a testament to this large-scale team, community, parent effort to be able to do what we've done. So I need to begin by thanking everyone for that. Our presentation this evening will really focus on considerations for adapted in-person learning. And in some broad strokes, we'll tell you what this presentation will cover. Kathy? So our objectives this evening, and as Natalie mentioned, we are trying to address the Board of Education's interest in this topic of full-time in-person options for students. Part of our presentation will begin by reviewing District 34's plan and pathway that we have taken for the 2021 school year. And we will outline considerations that will be necessary as any further contemplation is had with respect to adapted in-person learning. And by way of reminder, adapted in-person learning refers to a majority of students attending school in person daily with recommended safety measures. Online options are available for those who need them. We are not obviously at a point where we can return to a pre-pandemic environment where the health safety guidelines are no longer in play. Our hope is that someday we reach that destination. So the evolution of our environment, I think, is worth spending a minute to simply review, because in some ways it's been a long time since we've talked about some of this, and in some ways not. Next slide. We did present, and the board approved back in July, a plan that consisted of different learning modalities. And we also mentioned at that time that we would be looking closely at regional health data, the logistics and the operational challenges that were associated with these different modalities, specifically staffing. And not just staffing of teachers, but teachers, teacher associates, custodial staff, food service staff, bus drivers. We also knew and continue to know that our substitute pool is of critical importance in operating in any of the modalities that we will review and then talk more about in a moment. Also making sure that we have an ample supply of PPE and other types of cleaning and sanitizing supplies that we need to keep the buildings safe. And of course, following any executive orders that come from the governor and guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health and the Cook County Department of Public Health. Last spring, we were obviously in a full remote scenario. We were able to transition in September to our remote plus, and then to our hybrid. So we have had children in the school buildings since September. And now we're at this point where there has been some interest expressed in really unpacking what adapted in-person learning would look like. And that's what we're going to try to accomplish here. The other important component to just remind ourselves is that we do have the ability, and this is through executive order, for in school guidance from the governor, to enter into an adaptive pause, the purpose for which would be to react to any outbreaks that might occur in the school, or to react to community metrics that are escalating to the point where we're concerned. So at the time we entered our last adaptive pause, which was right around the time of Thanksgiving, we shared with you our dashboard in which all 12 of those cells were in the substantial transmission category. And so we look at that when we make decisions about adaptive pause, in addition to what might just be an outbreak. In an outbreak, the county is very instructive in terms of what schools must do as cases are reported. So that's just a quick review touchstone on adaptive pause and really what the purpose is. Next slide.
So yeah, I have the opportunity, and the next two slides actually tell the same story, and I'm going to focus on the second slide, but for the purposes of those watching, if you reference the presentation, these two slides contain the same information. So if you can click on slide 8, please, Kathy. So if you look at this slide, we presented this early on in our process, and it explains what a fully remote all the way to fully in-person model, breaking it down into 3 different areas. And those were remote plus, if you could click, Kathy, which is what we started with and ran from August 24th through September 25th. And it was an opportunity to start to get a feel for what it would be like to have percentages of students coming in small numbers. Hybrid is the opportunity, in our first group of hybrid we ran from September 29th through November 20th. And as we all know, the hybrid model brings in half the amount of kids in a typical classroom and provides an opportunity for content-focused instruction around, at that time, English, language arts, math, and then SEL. Click. We did, as Dane alluded to, have an adaptive pause from Thanksgiving until 2 weeks after winter break. If you can think back that far, we did have obviously a huge spike in cases across not only our community, but also or your community and mine, but across the state of Illinois, that required us to take additional preventative measures as it relates to the safety of our students, families, and faculty in our schools. Click. From January 19th through the present, we have been in a hybrid model and continuing to focus on those critical content areas while students are in, and then having social studies, science, and the fine arts in a more asynchronous and then remote environment. As was alluded to in our comments from one of our parents, we did transition this week or last week into a kinder in-person process. So they are coming in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Based on comments from parents, certainly looking at a positive step for those students to be able to come in a more regular opportunity, which they had not experienced as this being their first component. The last one is adaptive in person, which is what we're talking about tonight, and going to be able to lay out what that looks like and answer questions as it relates to future steps.
I think we got Mary here.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. All of our decisions have been made with our #1 priority in place, which is the health and safety of all of our students in our building and all of our staff. Our guidance comes from reading what ISB sends us, CDC, IDPH, and Cook County Department of Public Health. When we get new guidance, we take some time to tease through it and then implement the new guidance. These are the safety protocols, health and safety protocols that we began back in August to put in place. Everyone who enters our building conducts a daily self-assessment. We have a very extensive contact tracing protocols in place with a district contact tracer who oversees the entire process. We have daily cleaning in AMs and PMs. We've introduced different ventilation in our building so that our classrooms have open air circulation. We've added registered nurses to all of our buildings to help support the identification of children with symptoms. With that, we've added infirmaries. We have a very sophisticated District 34 and Township dashboard to be very transparent as to how many cases are currently in the area. We also have mandatory mask wearing. We have used the guidance of 6 feet. We've been consistent in applying that 6 feet distancing requirement in our hybrid environment. And that guidance that we received that I spoke about 2 slides ago supported that decision. For students whose needs require more one-to-one instruction, we've provided scrubs and gowns and face shields for those staff members and gloves. We implement hand washing and plexiglass dividers in some spaces and dividers for students who, the middle school students, while they are in school having lunch.
And I'm going to actually, I think our slides got moved around a little bit. So I'm going to start with this slide. The CDC updated guidance on February 12th, and they provided a little more clarity on what the transmission zones are that we should be looking at and the measures for them. And the actions that you can take in each area. So I'm going to turn this over. Kathleen Lean is our district nurse who sits on many a CDC and IDPH and Cook County Department of Public Health webinar and asks questions to get clarification that we need for our own district. So Kathleen, if you could talk a little bit about these indicators and thresholds and what they mean in our district.
I will. Good evening. As Kathy mentioned, on February 12th, we received further guidance from the CDC on mitigation strategies to help protect students, teachers, and staff with the goal of helping slow down the spread of COVID-19. One area that the CDC provided more specific guidance in was the designating the transmission zones. So District 34 falls within Cook County Region 10. We use these metrics as our guide to determine which transmission zone criteria the district currently meets. The first transmission zone is the total number of new cases per 100,000 persons in the past 7 days. The second indicator is the percentage of the NAT tests that are positive in the last 7 days. NAT tests are molecular tests, for example, PCR test. When these measures are at different levels, we use the higher threshold. We currently are in the substantial transmission, which places us in the orange. And if you refer to the chart, you see that we are 85 new cases per 100,000. Our positivity rate is 3.78, which would put us in the blue low transmission rate for that metric. But however, due to the higher cases, as we're identified as substantial transmission, we would be considered to stay in orange.
And I want to point out, we're showing here the data from the CDC countywide data because it is updated more frequently than the data that we see in the Township and Township Plus data. So for example, when we were putting this presentation together, we put some data in on Friday and it changed. So we put in, this is the most recent data that the CDC shows, and the cases went down from Friday to today's data. So we wanted to make sure we had put that in there, but we do also look at the township data that we have on our dashboard on our website as well. I'm going to go back to what actions we can take in each of the transmission zones. So that was part of the guidance that came out. So you can see that in the high transmission zone, there's a little bit of conflict in the wording for distancing. You can see that in the high transmission zone and the substantial transmission zone, physical distancing of 6 feet or more is required. But there's a footnote that indicates that if 6 feet distancing is not possible within a class, you should ensure distancing between classes. So the protocols don't change with the new CDC guidance, but the language is a little bit stronger in some areas, but remains inconsistent. And here are some examples where we see that inconsistency. These are pulled right from the guidance. Again, you see where it's required, essential, maximize to the greatest extent possible. And if it's not possible, then do what you can to keep distancing between the classes. So we do look to the guidance, but we have consistently implemented 6 feet distancing as a standard in our buildings. That has been the one constant in all that we've done through this, through our safety measures.
Good evening. We're going to talk a little bit about our hybrid observations. And with our model of hybrid, we do include the Wednesday that is remote. And there's some instructional advantages to that piece where actually our AM and our PM, so our whole class comes together. And there's a little bit more opportunity for some content such as social studies, science. It allows for some differentiation, for some work groups. So that Wednesday actually is a pretty powerful experience in terms of access to teacher direct instruction, small group instruction through Zoom, through breakout rooms. And so that's an element of that Wednesday, in addition to the AM and PM every other day. All of this comes together, of course, because of the incredible commitment, the hard work, the passion from our staff, our amazing children as they adapt and they experience 21st century learning through these Zoom experiences, these classrooms, both hands-on in the classroom and at home. It's amazing to see the pivoting and their thinking and their problem solving and their access and their communication skills. It's really unbelievable. And parents, thank you so much for all of this sort of juggling and moving around, and it's resulting, there's some output that we want to show you in the next couple slides in a minute in terms of Ames Web and NWA. So we're excited about that. Just some other variables and some points. The transmission factor, no transmission within schools. Also, we've not closed the school or grade due to outbreak, which is a common sort of communication piece we've seen out in the community. And goal has remained as it was originally designed, an option for consistency in terms of a remote experience for our families and children. So we're going to take a look at some data. When we do indeed look at aggregate large scale data, when we're looking at hundreds of data points, we're typically looking at performance or achievement at a given moment of time. And typically that's the fall, the winter, and the spring. And then we're looking at growth factors. So here on the screen, we're looking at actually our fall to winter achievement with our littlest learners, our first and second graders, where indeed they took a fall Ames Web assessment. And these are early literacy and early numeracy skills. And then you can see the winter sort of snapshot. And what we're striving for is both that sort of tier 1 performance level, which is the green indicator, and then the growth of that tier 1, which is sort of indicating that children are responding well to our tier 1 curriculum. It's working, it's clicking, it's really moving towards mastery of those skills into future grades. So this is just an overview, a quick snapshot of the growth and the achievement. Then when we switch over to NWA MAP for our 3rd through 8th graders, we do a little bit more of comparison, and that is more of a normative concept. This is a little bit more scrunched down in terms of visibility. But what we're looking at here, and we're still towards the end of our winter benchmarking for NWA, so I can't give you that fall to winter picture yet, where our timing is a little bit different this year. But just as a point of interest, we have fall 2019 to fall 2020 as a growth metric and a performance indicator. And what we're looking for is pre-pandemic, that fall, where many of our grade levels on the aggregate, the norm, many of our grade levels were in the 85th percentile to the 95th percentile in terms of achievement. And we're seeing, again, it ebbs and flows a little bit, and each grade could look a little bit different any given year. But when we look at the bottom screen, fall 19 to fall 20, and the top screen, which is language arts and reading, fall 19 to fall 20, we're seeing similar achievements in terms of student performance. So just these checkpoints to make sure that our growth and our achievement is moving along this school year. Thank you.
There are also observations, and these are just some of them, additional observations that we see as part of our hybrid model that point to some areas of continued focus and growth needed. And we know that, and we've stated many times, that the social emotional impact on our students, our staff, and families is a critical component during hybrid that is something both currently we need to address, but also as we prepare for the remainder of this year, next year, and likely for years to come in terms of addressing those areas with the most appropriate services. There's also, in the hybrid model, we see and understand that there are impacts on families and their financial states and daily schedules. We heard in one of our parent comments about, dual working parents that are essential workers, and how do they provide care for their children. And that certainly has created a hardship on those families that we see as we're evaluating and looking at scenarios. From an educational lens, the asynchronous component of science, social studies, and the arts is certainly something that, in a perfect world, we would want to prioritize those opportunities as we do in a normal year. And in the hybrid model, they do become a part of the asynchronous, which is slightly different than having a teacher in front of you at all times working with those subjects. The other thing, and as Matt alluded to as a positive, one of the negatives to our hybrid model is that the only day that the whole class is together is Wednesday. It's not a sole reason to have the Wednesday, but it is a component of the Wednesday environment does bring the whole class together, so that if there were a transition to a full model, that students would know each other and be able to accommodate, but it also is an opportunity for the teacher to do different activities and different groupings with students. And then we know that, and if you've experienced this, you know it as well, that having a student in quarantine is a struggle. Whether they have tested positive, they were a close contact, both of those provide unique opportunities for students to Zoom in for introductory lessons if you're in our EC5 environment, or if it was a non-essential quarantine where a student traveled, it's a different process that is also causes some conversations and some difficulty for students. We have staff quarantines and substitute shortages that we're continuing to deal with. And obviously the hybrid and any of the models currently present themselves with a district financial constraint that we continue to monitor.
Good evening, everyone. While maintaining all of the safety protocols, as previously mentioned, we have also been able to increase in-person time as we've moved through the different models of remote plus, hybrid, adaptive pause, and back to hybrid. Our kindergartners are now attending 4 half days a week, and 25% of our students who qualify for English language services are attending either additional half days or full days.
And our students, our special education students, or our students with 504 plans, approximately 50% of that population are attending more time in school than that half day. Our students that are at risk are also attending. Approximately the majority of those students, anywhere from 50 to 75%, are receiving their intervention while in person. They may stay later, some of them. It really does vary depending on their needs. And that's how we've made decisions as we've gone along based on the individual needs, their attendance, their engagement, their academic success.
Throughout the pandemic, one thing that will carry over after we are back in a more normal environment throughout the world are the connections with the other districts in the township, as well as the other public entities in the Northfield Township. We have the Northfield Township Coronavirus Task Force, and we get together regularly, and that includes the school districts having connections and talking about sharing their experiences and learning from each other. So we do know that our neighboring districts have various environments, and we've heard comments about the differences in what other schools are doing. So these are the township schools, and some are all in, some have a combination of all in and hybrid, and keeping that 6 feet distance. Again, some are able to keep that 6 feet distance because of their enrollment, the amount of in-person versus remote, and the space that they have available to them to provide the 6 foot distance with that enrollment. We also connect with districts, neighboring and like districts in other areas, and learn from them. We know that some have recently made announcements about their changes, and have talked to them about learning again from their experiences, and take away what we can from those experiences.
So the next few slides are just pictures, illustrations for you to be able to understand what a classroom looks like now, and what a classroom looks like in a more adaptive in-person model, an opportunity for additional students. So here's our current hybrid, and again, it's a typical classroom. Each classroom looks slightly different. Each classroom is slightly different size, but this is an average classroom of 800 square feet. In our hybrid model, we have 12 students, 72-inch distance side to side, and 72-inch distance front to back. That does take into consideration that non-movement of students. If students are moving, that is a dynamic feature. So if students are moving, they're closer to each other. However, in this model, and looking at it, it's an opportunity just to get a perspective. Next slide. So here's an example of an all-in primary based on our current assumptions of numbers. As we pull out those students who are already in goal. It's important to note that as we go up in age, our class size goes up. The room size doesn't necessarily go up, but our class size does go up. In this model, you have an average distance from center of chair to center of chair would be, side to side would be 60 inches, front to back would be 45 inches, 45 inches, and it's 20 students that we're looking at in here. It's also important to note that as we have been looking over the years and transitioning to a more collaborative environment, we have buildings and classrooms that they didn't have desks, a lot of them. And so it's required us to repurpose desks, remove tables, but in situations where we have tables, it is closer in terms of the distance between students. in every model that we do provides a 6-foot teaching space for teachers, as that is a key component in any district that we talk to in helping to maintain that opportunity for less quarantined teachers and exposure for a teacher because of their ability to keep 6 feet. Here's another example of an intermediate school. As I noted earlier, it does have more students. Instead of having the 20 students that we would find in our primary buildings, we do in the current structure have on average 24 students. It's not actually on average, it's our max would be 24 students that we'd be looking at. There are a few classrooms that would be 25 little larger rooms, but they would be 60 inches side to side and 48 inches front to back for those classrooms. Next slide. So we know that, as Raquel and Mary laid out, that our current adaptive in-person opportunities do provide the 6-foot distancing. So when we're talking about kindergarten, we built in the structure for kindergarten. We had created additional classrooms. Our class sizes were lower, as well as in certain buildings, we did have to move students out of the kindergarten classroom and into a larger space like the art room or the music room in order to facilitate the appropriate distancing for those kindergartners who we were prioritizing to come in. EL and dual language, as well as student services, also were at the 6 feet distancing. And our model that I just shared as it relates to coming in with more students, we would anticipate 85% of our 1st through 5th grade classrooms, because we're taking kindergarten out because they're already in with EC, they would not meet the 6 feet distancing. This is just an example. It's not to state anything other than the fact that because of size of room and because of the amount of students, it would be under the 6 foot distancing, as well as around 90% of our 6 through 8 classrooms would also be under the 6 foot distancing. And distancing would approximately be between 3.6 and 4 feet in order to facilitate those environments. Obviously, it would depend on the exact class size and the exact size of the room. So we're using that range, but estimate that it would be between 3.6 and 4 feet as it relates to student center of desk to center of desk or center of chair.
The distance impact also has an impact on transportation. As we know now, we can have 49 passengers on a regular route. And so realizing that we do have over that 49 number in terms of students that are assigned to a route, there are some routes, if we did all in, where we need to move some of the students off into other routes, potentially utilizing one additional bus that we have at our availability. And also contact tracing is done for anyone who's within a 6 feet distance. So the closer we get kids sitting each other, we do know that there would be an impact on contact tracing. When it comes to lunch, we do know that the guidelines say 6 feet has to be the distance when masks are off. We also know that there's a limit of 50 students per space. So when we talk about bringing more students in, we also need to space them back out so they can take their masks off and eat. So one consideration is that we would need more space and the scheduling to go along with that to get students to be able to eat safely. And then obviously it's the increased need for supervision for those additional spaces as well. And then the one change that we heard in the opening comments is that there wouldn't be enough time potentially for Mr. Ruelli and his staff to get in and clean like they've been doing in hybrid. So we'd likely move to a student and staff-based cleansing, disinfecting before and after eating times.
Sorry, I was muted there. I'm going to share a little bit about how staffing would be impacted by an adaptive in-person model. And you've heard my colleagues talk a lot about numbers, whether it's distancing or whether it's numbers of students involved in a classroom setting in an adapted in-person model. What they're referring to comes from these spreadsheets that were created by the facilities department and then helped along with Brian and myself to identify what would classrooms look like if we wanted to maintain 6-foot distancing with the numbers of students that are assigned to a classroom. They're not in that configuration now physically, but they are assigned to these classrooms. And what we see here by color coding is what this chart is doing is comparing for each classroom space, for each learning space, how many students are assigned to that classroom in general, whether it's a homeroom, it's a fairly constant number. In some cases, it's not. And then how many desks can be fitted in that classroom, maintaining a 6-foot distance. The column to the right then tells us, well, if we consider the numbers of students, the capacity of the classroom to have those desks set up at 6-foot distancing, and the number of adults involved in that classroom, because sometimes it's more than just one adult, which of those classrooms fit that specific number of students and staff members? Those are the ones that are highlighted on the right in green. And which classrooms do not fit the numbers of students and staff and maintain social distancing of 6 feet? Those are the classrooms noted in red. And so we did this through, I'm going to show you first primary and intermediate school buildings to show you what this data is telling us about the adapted in-person model. Thanks, Kathy. So first with the primaries, again, remember that our assumptions are a 6-foot distance since that's been our standard for the school year. And we're looking at what the current sections would be with all students together in person and considering all the adults. What we see is if we look at Lyon, Westbrook, and Hanking, I'm just going to quickly go through, they're all dashes there. So basically that means kindergarten is fine. We can fit all of our kindergarten students in their assigned classrooms with the assigned adults and not worry that we won't be able to keep them 6 foot apart as long as we can keep our kindergartners from moving around out of their seats. And when we then go to first grade, let's look at Lyon, first grade. The column that's marked number of sections over capacity, the number in there is 4 in that cell. So we have 4 classrooms out of however many first grade classrooms there are at Lyon that are above the number of students that it can hold, that each of those 4 classrooms can hold and maintain 6 feet social distancing. Well, how many students would we have to take out of those sections so that we could get them within the range of capacity for the room? In total, it's 12 at Lyon, first grade. So we'd have to peel off different numbers from each of those 4 sections. We'd end up with a total of 12 students. Well, those 12 students now need to be taught by a different teacher than the one they're assigned to now. And one teacher would be enough because we would be able to set up a space at some building, preferably Lyon, where we can fit those 12 students and maintain social distancing. And if you work through each of the first grades in the other buildings, except for Hanking, we see a larger number. We have 5 sections in first grade that are beyond the capacity of the room, and 27 students that are kind of displaced from those 5 sections. Well, we wouldn't put 27 first graders together. We would need 2 teachers to see to that, so that we have a space that would hold a subset of the 27 and 1 teacher for each of those subsets. And you note that the pattern is that as we go up in grades, go up the ladder in grades, the number of sections or the total number of students that need to be reassigned increases for the most part. Now we're going to look at intermediates, grades 3, 4, and 5. Now, intermediate schools have a class target size of 27. So we're going to have much larger groups of students in the classrooms to begin with. When we were looking at kindergarten and first and second grade, we're talking anywhere between 22 and 25 students as the target. Here we're targeting 27 in a room, but what you see is a huge number of sections at every grade level that are beyond capacity while maintaining 6-foot distancing. How many students? A range from 13 to 55 students would have to be displaced out of their assigned sections for the year. Some would have to come out of each of, say, 6 sections if we're looking at Hoffman's 5th grade. And if we siphoned off the correct number from each of those sections that are over capacity, we'd have 55 students. Well, again, we wouldn't put 55 students in one place. One of the reasons why is we can't have a gathering of 50, more than 50 people. So we need 4 teachers if we wanted to put them at similar size classes as their counterparts would have in 5th grade. So this is a lot of information in two fairly simple charts that explains how many sections at each building at each grade level, K-5, are beyond the capacity if we want to maintain 6-foot distancing. So if we look at this model, maintaining 6-foot distancing, what does that involve if we wanted to do something like this? So Kathy, these are the questions that we have come up with. And this is a subset of questions. There are more, but to begin with, I mentioned that students would be siphoned off of those sections that are at over capacity. Well, how are those students selected? And then how are they grouped? Do we assume that we just group them all together into new sections? Is there any methodology to that? And is there any methodology to how the students are selected who have to be pulled out of those overcapacity sections? As far as teachers, we'd be looking at needing quite a group of additional teachers to provide for all of these new sections of students. So to hire at this time of the year is a challenge when we're looking at a few positions. We're looking at much more than a few positions. So hiring would be tremendously challenging. So could we fill those positions differently? We could repurpose staff members. We could say, well, the LRC director has a professional educator's license, and that means they're licensed to teach first grade, second grade, third grade, et cetera. Do we want to not have the LRC director doing the work of the LRC director and instead function as a classroom teacher? The same could be said of innovation specialists, of others who are not assigned classrooms, but would have a professional educator's license. Well, they're not delivering their subjects. We could also do it that way. We could say, well, maybe we should lighten the academic load, and maybe global language at the middle school may not be something that's taught for the rest of the year, and all those global language teachers may be endorsed to teach other subjects, may be endorsed. And yes, we're going to talk a little bit more about middle school. But again, which subjects would not be covered then? That's a significant decision for the board to make. We'd also have to find spaces, obviously. And we'd want to look inside the school as much as possible to find more teaching spaces. So we could do that if some sections remain remote, because right now our fine arts sections in K-5 are taught remotely. The teachers, the students are remote for those subjects. Do we want to continue to do that? So the adapted in-person doesn't mean that all subjects are being taught to them in person. It means that all students are in person, but maybe they wouldn't receive all instruction in person. But again, which subjects would that occur with, where we would eliminate those subjects from being taught in person to give us the space to give up those classrooms that we need for the additional sections that we're creating. Okay, now on to middle school. You got a little preview there, a little commercial. So as we went from K to 5, we saw the sections increase, or the number of sections increase that we need to create in order to maintain 6-foot distancing. It is no different when we get to the middle. The class size target for grades 6 through 8 is 29 plus or minus 3. We call it a flex factor, and the board approved that nearly 12 years ago. I'm dating myself a bit. And that was because of the middle school schedule. Because we are teaming, we need a little bit more flexibility with class size, and the board agreed to that. So what this means is that we can have sections of 32, up to 32 at the middle. Well, the larger our numbers go, the ability to keep students at a 6-foot distance then is more challenging. And so you see how many sections in this peak is in the red, meaning that we couldn't fit the section as it currently is configured in these classrooms. There would need to, again, be some pulling out of students or some other thinking, using large spaces, but we have a limited number of those in the buildings. How does that get accomplished? So we did look at middle school. It just becomes exponentially more challenging with a significantly larger number of sections that are beyond capacity while maintaining 6-foot distancing. You can advance, Kathy. And this is just going through each of the buildings before we start to see some green. There are some spaces that will fit the students that are assigned to them, or because of the role, a psychologist may not meet with 10 students at a time. So that office says it will fit 4. And so that's typically what's seen in that setting. So that's why we'll start to see some green, usually in smaller spaces. And just, we did this at both buildings to see if there was any difference between the facilities at Springman versus the facilities at Atia. And there really isn't. We're going to see the same type of capacity issues at both middle schools. So what does all of this mean for staffing? What it means is we're looking at a significant number of additional teachers and additional learning spaces, K-8, that are needed in order to maintain 6-foot distancing if that's the board's desire. So I just wanted to bring that forward for you to consider. We're looking at potentially over 100 classrooms that need to be, the spaces need to be found, as well as the adults to instruct those teachers need to be found. And when looking at finding teachers, not only do we have the issue of identifying staff for those roles, we have the concern that we're doing this at the start or near the start of the 3rd trimester. And we're looking at students who have been with their teachers for the last 2 trimesters. And so some could experience a significant change. We're looking at staff who may have never taught the subject if we are reassigning them or hiring them. Either way, they may never have had any actual classroom experience with this, nor any of the training that might have gone along with the implementation of some of our, especially some of our literacy initiatives. Just pointing out more considerations. And finally, the impact to staff. We do have 2 collective bargaining units. We have our GEA, Glenview Education Association, and the GPA, the Professional Association, for our support staff. They would have the right for and the ability to request the possibility of bargaining the impact of these changes on their working group. So for example, Mr. Miller was talking about lunch and what that could possibly look like in an all-in or adaptive in-person approach. We have to look at how to supervise those students because again, we have that 50 in a group cap. And so we're going to need more supervisors for lunch. That's a change if this is a job that they're not having previously been done. So that's a change in working condition. That's an example of something that could be bargained on. And I believe that brings us to next steps.
Yeah, next steps. So what are some of the efforts that will move us forward? One of them is a pretty visible one. It's on the news all the time. Our effort to vaccinate all staff is very high, but as you hear on the news, the vaccine supply is low, and some recent challenges with the weather have tightened up that bottleneck a little bit right now. But we do have approximately 44%. These numbers, I haven't changed them since Friday, and we have heard from a few more staff members, substitutes, and bus drivers. So we may be 45%, but these numbers here, 44% of our staff, substitutes, and bus drivers have started the vaccination process. So 331 have the first dose only. 116 are fully vaccinated as of today, and 20 additional have upcoming appointments and have not yet received their first dose. We are including our substitute pool and bus drivers in those numbers. They are part of our D34 family that is making our environment safe and functioning. So we need them, so they are part of this pool for vaccines. But we do know that there are opportunities on the way. Northwest Community Healthcare has designated doses when they get them for D34 staff, so we're working with them. And there are some other opportunities out there. So when that vaccine supply opens up, we are hopeful that we will be able to get all the staff who would like a vaccine in line and get vaccinated.
So COVID testing, is testing part of the plan? We are continually discussing this topic and exploring it, but testing isn't the solution to making our environment safer. As we all know, there are oftentimes many false reads when it comes to testing. If we were to be able to bring in testing, we could only bring in a rapid test, which they aren't very reliable. And if a student had a rapid test, a positive rapid test, they would be required to go and get a PCR test. So I think that if we continue to explore this, we really would have to define our purpose and what our desired outcomes would be for testing, and all of the logistics that would be surrounded around implementing something like this within our school setting.
So to just pull back together everything that we talked about as it related to distancing and the ability to have adaptive in-person opportunity, we can accommodate all of our students currently in hybrid model K through 5 using a 3.5 to 4 foot range. So that is possible. It's just important to note that it is less than the 6 foot. It's just again something that is needed to take into consideration as we evaluate the next steps. That model would require fewer additional classroom teachers, would be required, but likely not eliminated completely. It'd just be a small number of reassignments based on a small number of movements. We would still need to talk through how we're going to do fine arts. We are using some of the fine arts classrooms currently for other classes that have come in, like kindergarten. And we will also be using likely the PE spaces or larger spaces to accommodate both entrance of students into school, but also for possible for lunches and other environments where we need larger groups of or larger spaces for larger groups of students so that we can accommodate. As Eric noted and was included in the presentation, there is an increased cleaning measures that will need to be instituted. And those cleaning measures as it relates to the reduced distancing would both be handled by our wonderful custodial staff, but also, and most importantly, taking advantage and utilizing our students and staff and their ability to clean and clean when they come into the space and sit down, clean when they leave a space, as is being handled in other districts all around us. It is important to note that with a reduced range for students, that the level of increased distancing or increased close contacts would also come into place because of that decreased social distancing. So we will see in an environment like that, like other districts have, an increase in the number of students who become close contacts because just out of the way things are structured, kids aren't 6 feet, that a student sitting around them would instantly become close contacts and be required to quarantine.
So in our slide here, as we come to a conclusion, and I know the board is eager to have its conversation, but in determining a path for any form of adapted in-person, should the board wish to do that, we really need to establish a timeline. There are many component parts, most of which we have listed here, that would need to be defined and further investigated. We would have to have a strong parent communication around this topic with Q&A. There would need to be an open enrollment period similar to like what we had for the third trimester. Perhaps a webinar explaining information about any of the implications that we've talked about in this evening's presentation. The actual impact on transportation, we have some guesses. We would need some time to get that sorted out. The lunch service and lunch logistics and setup is a significant challenge. None of these are insurmountable, but we do list them as challenges because we need more time. Scheduling and placement considerations that might need to be made with any balancing and the social emotional impact of that. We've talked about staffing. We have some general ideas of what the implications would be Certainly, at a minimum, supervisory in nature. There could be some other teaching impacts to that that are unforeseen. And then, lead time for classroom furniture, setup, and supplies, as noted in the presentation. Not all classrooms at all grade levels were utilizing desks. So at the primary grades in particular, tables being used. So needing to secure desks to replace those. So we would need, we have to do some more work with that, refining the staffing model and the space needs as we've alluded to. Continue to adjust our remote option because a remote option would continue in this model presumably, and maintaining the health and safety guidelines that exist. And there's obviously more to it than just the social distancing. So with that, we'll take a break from talking, and Natalie, at this point, you can facilitate some conversation with the board. Thank you all for your patience and time.
Right. Well, thank you to all of you for that very in-depth and thorough report. I think it's given us a lot to think about and a lot for us to discuss. I know each one of us have our own questions and views, and if none of you mind, I'm just going to kick us off with the general statement of the purpose of this discussion is really to see if we're ready for the next point in our plan. Our plan has always emphasized safety. Now, it seems pretty obvious from the presentation that in order to do an adapted in-person in a realistic way, because I don't think we have the money, the time, the staff to do it maintaining that 6-foot distance. Are we in a position where we feel like 6 feet is not a rigid guideline? Is it a as best as we can guideline? And I think that's something where each one of us are going to have something to say about that. So I want to put that out as one thing that we need to talk about. I know we all want safety, so it's not. So when we talk about in person, I just want everybody listening to understand that we're not saying we're throwing out all the guidelines. We're just bringing everybody back. It's called adapted in person for a reason, because it's still maintaining safety guidelines. And I just also want to say, if it wasn't clear from the presentation, I don't think anybody's going forward with the idea that we would be getting rid of GOAL. The GOAL Academy, GOAL Online would still be an option for all families. I just want to make that clear, that nobody is proposing to do away with GOAL. So students wouldn't be forced to come back in if they didn't feel safe to do so. But I do think we should also recognize that there are families who are signed up for hybrid because they feel hybrid is the safest model for the moment. And by going all in, we have to recognize that for those families, they will most likely choose the GOAL option. And so for those families, those kids are actually going to be losing in-person instruction. I just think that's a valid point we need to consider and weigh and talk about. And we need to also always consider the social emotional toll this has taken on our students, either whether they're not getting enough in person, or the people that will then be going more to GOAL, we're taking away from them. And these are, I'm not saying that this is, as Dr. Deli said, insurmountable. I just think these are factors we need to weigh. Those are just some of the things. So I'm going to let some of my, I have more to say, but I want to let some of my fellow board members contribute to the conversation first before I go any further with some of the other. So, John, I see your hand is up first, so I'm going to call on you first.
Fair enough. Thank you, Natalie. So I think looking at the presentation and the facts in our community and everything that we can see, clearly we're not going to be able to do this and maintain a 6-foot social distancing at all times. We talked a little bit about the guidelines. They're very confusing. They're almost circular in their logic at some points. But, they do offer some strategies, and some of those strategies are distancing for one, or maintaining as much as you can, cleaning, cohorting, physical barriers, all types of things that we can incorporate, including testing at some point in time. But before I go too far into that, I did want to point out just some of the great news that came out of that report. It's just fantastic that we've got 44% of the people already in process of our staff. That's great news. And then we've got 98% who are willing. And that's perhaps even the larger piece. We're going to get to a place in our society overall and in our little teeny community of D34 also where this goes away. And the inoculation is a big step of that. So that's just great news. And also just on the practicality of the academic achievement that Dr. Silverman outlined, that's great that we're able to do what we've been doing, is having some positive effect. No one says that this is the perfect solution, but it's a pretty good one. And congratulations to all who put that into place, and to our teachers for working extra hard for making sure that gets done. But I go back to our point, we're not going to be able to maintain 6 foot distance. These guidelines are confusing, but we always look at all the data, not one specific. There's not a logarithm that says X plus Y equals go back to school. So as of now, the data looks good. Things are trending down everywhere in whatever you want to define as community, as the county, as the state, as the district, as our township. It's all getting better. Inoculations are only going to help that process. So I think this is the time to get our plan to go forward. And Dr. Deli, you mentioned in there that we need to develop a timeline, and that's probably going to be a group effort here. I will just throw this out that while we're going to maintain safety at all times, we're going to watch our data. We do need to pick the date, and I'd say the timeline should be after spring break. A couple of weeks after. I think taking an adaptive pause in there would be wise, as we know people are going to travel all over the country. How long that is, what day that is, we can work that out. But we need to get back this spring. If kids need that normalcy, I think we all know all the positives for it. I'm not going to reiterate it. I'm not going to even lay out all the negatives. But once we get teachers inoculated, I think we need to go back in after spring break. And as far as next fall goes, let's see how this goes, and then let's continue to add some extra layers of protection, including the testing and the physical barriers and whatever other guidance we can follow. So a bit rambling, I apologize, but that's my point.
John, I didn't think that was rambling at all, but not that you asked me. Anybody who wants to go next? I know we all have something we want to say, so. Okay, I will just say a few more things, to be honest, building on some of the things that John said. And I think that to say, when we were looking at the slides about what region or what color we're in, I felt it was very counterintuitive. As John said, we see numbers dropping and we're at a positivity rate, basically what it was back in March a year ago, before we started going through these spikes. So it seems counterintuitive that we're in an orange zone. And I know we were using Region 10 data, which is suburban Cook County, which is what the CDC guidelines ask you to do, look at county data. But I wonder what our transmission rate is in our township data. And so it just feels counterintuitive to say that we're in an area of high transmission. It's hard to accept that fact when we hear so many other factors. And I agree with John, the fact that teachers and staff are on their way to being vaccinated. I feel like an after spring break timeline, if that's where we're headed, allows for everybody to get vaccinated. While I'm talking, has anybody else decided that they want to say something? All right, I saw Scott's hand go up first, then Katie, then Diane.
So I want to say that we've been following our plan, and it's exciting to hear that our plan gets to move forward possibly. And I'm on the same page as John here, that I think we need a few weeks to get this plan in place and also let the weather get a little better. So hopefully April would be a good timeline right after spring break, so we can maybe even open our windows more, get more air in there, perhaps people in the community would be willing to buy their classrooms HEPA filters. That would be helpful also. The term that the CDC uses, when feasible, I think is changed. So I'm perfectly ready to move to a when feasible, less than 6 feet. I do like that the teachers get to keep 6 feet distancing. And I'm very happy that the inoculations going forward can take away almost all the risk of severe COVID or possibly dying. So I would be perfectly comfortable with an April timeline to move forward with an adaptive in-person. The other plan to hire 100 more teachers and find another school doesn't seem feasible at this point, just like 6 feet doesn't seem feasible in our district. So that's all I have to say for now. Maybe I'll add more later.
Scott, before we go further, Scott, you said something about people buying HEPA filters for their kids' class. I just want to caution that, because you're going to find some classes getting a filter and some not, based on some parent buying it for their kid and another parent not being able to. So let's be careful before we go down that road. If we put HEPA filters in classes, they have to be in every class, but that doesn't mean parents can't help us with it. But we just got
I'm not saying that it wouldn't be equitable in the whole school district. I'm saying maybe that's something like the community has already helped with getting us vaccinations for teachers. They've already given us so many more ideas with their emails and everything. So I do appreciate all the help the community has given us already.
Right. And I'm sure that's what you meant. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to everybody who was listening, that whatever happens will be equitable across all classrooms. All right. I think I went to Katie and then Diane. I think that's where we're going.
Per usual, I've written down my thoughts ahead of time, so I'm going to read through this, and then I also have a couple questions. So I believe it is fair to say that the closures of schools is a public health crisis in and of itself. We are seeing the struggles become greater and greater for all aged children. We need to shift our mindset from what we can't do to what we can do. We must get our students back to the classroom full time as soon as possible. And I also will agree with John that after spring break seems like a very feasible timeline. Starting with our youngest learners, which again, kindergartners, we are back. And as a mom of a kindergartner, I'm very grateful, and she's excited to be back more too. Partly because we know that the youngest learners are the most challenged by the remote learning, and partly because we know that the science continues to say that the younger children transmit the virus less than older children. If you really think about it, our current first graders have never seen a full day of in-person learning to date. Many of them will be 7 or close to 8 years of age before they are in our buildings for a full day. By fall, our incoming third graders will have only seen 3/4 of a year in person full day school. If you compare that to a peer in a neighboring district, both public or private, of whom had full day kindergarten and has also been in school full time since the fall, there is a large disparity to be had. The other day, I saw an interview with Vice President Harris, and she referenced studies that show if a child is not at their appropriate reading level by 3rd grade, they are most likely never to reach their grade level reading abilities. We can't let this happen on our watch. Clearly, getting vaccines for our teachers is a priority, and it's been a struggle for many. But the new CDC guidelines say that it is not a prerequisite to open schools. I believe that with all the thorough mitigations that we have put in place at the schools, this can be done while simultaneously working at getting all of our teachers vaccinated that want to be vaccinated. In addition to this, if we follow what the CDC is saying in terms of the community spread and the numbers, we should be able to be less than 6 feet apart. I will also add that the World Health Organization recommends 1 meter of social distancing, and the last time I checked, 1 meter was equivalent to 3.3 feet. There are other liabilities to be conscious of besides the virus itself. Suicides and child abuse are just a few of these liabilities directly tied to school closures. Our children deserve better. The time is now, and we owe this to them. If we all work together and I say that strongly, as a community, people have to do their part to keep each other safe. I believe that it can be done. Now, with that said, I have a couple questions about ways to bring in more people at reduced cost or no cost. But has there been any talk amongst the administration about how, or if we can bring in parent volunteers to do things such as lunch supervision or cleaning? Because I do think there'd be a ton of parents that would raise their hand at any of those things, and it would be at no cost to the district.
There has been consideration of utilizing our community who has been so supportive this, this entire year plus in ways in which they could help with non-licensed responsibilities. And that's especially true of the lunch supervision. We're also looking at could we expedite work with our ROE, our Regional Office of Education, for those parents who do want to obtain substitute certificates as well.
So it would, just to add, Katie, the answer is obviously it would depend on how the volunteer would be deployed, but volunteers would need to be supervised by someone who can. So, but as long as you had one person, in a larger group with volunteers, that would work. So it would have to spawn somehow that way.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing goes for, similar to kind of Scott's point about the HEPA filters, providing barriers within, for each kid. I know many people have priced them out, but I'm sure too that there'd be many parents who would volunteer to pay for a classroom of barriers, so that's something too that we can think about that wouldn't be necessarily a cost to the district.
Well, again, I just want to caution that if
I know.
it happens in one class, it's got to happen.
Understood. Yes, understood. That's all I have.
Can I just answer something for Katie? Just something to consider, Katie, is, our community is phenomenal. We would appreciate parents coming in, but we also have to take into consideration that the more people that you're bringing into your building, the more possibility of transmitting. So they would have to be self-assessed, and we would have to really look at those logistics.
Sure. And maybe we can run testing for those volunteers too.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, we have the wonderful resources of Representative Fine at work at Flick Park, and they're doing a great job over there with free testing. So that is a resource all of us have available to us, and perhaps it could be utilized in this setting. All right, Diane, I know I said you're next, so your turn.
I agree with a lot of what's been said in terms of that there's been a lot of positive news and that vaccines are a very positive move for all of us. And I think that there's not a single board member that doesn't agree that the ultimate goal is to get everyone back eventually in schools. But one thing I do feel as though we're lacking is just making an assumption that our numbers would look the same. And I just want to make sure that we are clear that the numbers could shift. And Dane, I think I've already kind of told you that one piece of the puzzle I'd really like to know is having an idea of how many students would be withdrawn or added to in-person learning from the current hybrid population if we implemented the less than 6 foot standard. And we looked at this happen with GBS, and I think you put the number up on your presentation. The numbers there are 35%. People have various reasons why they chose hybrid versus remote learning. I'd really like to have an idea of what that looks like, because I'm going to be an optimist here. There's a slight possibility we could wind up at a 6 foot distance if there is a shift. We don't know that. I mean, it's also quite possible we'll have to be working with less than 6 feet, but that is a piece of data that I really just would like to have. So that's my question. Thank you.
All right. I have more to add, but I see Jim's hand is up, so I'm going to go to you, Jim.
Okay, I just want to add sort of the collective that I'm also very much on board with the idea of kind of that after spring break timeframe of thinking about of going back to an adapted in person. And I just wanted to give a little perspective on how I've been thinking about the risk profile. There's various metrics that are out there from the CDC and the IDPH around education. And really every metric right now is in that blue minimal category, with the one exception of the community transmission rate, which is now drifting, near 100 per 100,000. And I think Kathy, you would put it down at 85. That's getting in the zone. I just want to point out that that's 80% lower than where it was 2 months ago. That number was up like at 5 and 600, and it's down at 100 or 85 now. And there's no reason to think that with the additional vaccines that in another 4 or 5 weeks, that will be right in the zone. So like, I don't think it's making an unreasonable bet, if you will, on the sort of the risk metrics there. And another thing too, is we've been operating our school at 6 foot distancing with all kinds of other mitigations in place. And it's hard. And that actually provides some evidence that maybe tweaking down to 4 feet is not going to be this big springboard of giant risk exploding out of the measures. And I'm certain that I work in a school myself that has 6 foot distancing, and students are never 6 foot apart every minute of the time, right? It's the classroom seats are 6 feet apart, but there's all kinds of transition points where they're passing each other. And so it just, my feeling is that by going down to 4 feet and still maintaining 6 feet at eating points, I think that's still an important part of the plan, is to not relax your guard when masks are off in those scenarios. But that's another reason I get comfortable. And then also just people point out, that we have the vaccination profile, which will look dramatically different in 4 to 5 weeks, as well as other, just immunity within the community at large. And so I guess one question I have, is the decision on distancing the only thing that's really standing in the way of deciding to do adapted in person? Like if the board got comfortable with saying, yep, let's go from 6 to 4, are there 3 or 4 other questions that need to be answered to say, yeah, we need, or is that it?
Well, that's certainly the baseline consideration. That's where we're at. That's why we are operating in a hybrid model. We were not able to get all the children in and maintain a 6 foot distance. That's what triggered our thinking around hybrid, which is then the standard that we applied in operating. But so, yeah, that's obviously, if it's not the key, it's one of the top 2 or 3 keys to this. But then I would also just add, as you alluded to, Jim, that the distancing 6 feet or less than 6 feet that we have focused on, at least in the presentation, is distancing within a classroom.
Right.
So as there's migration patterns throughout the building, which there will be, that has more students, whatever that number is, to Diane's point, whatever that number is, the distancing does become more challenging in places like hallways, in bathrooms, in common spaces, cafeterias, et cetera, as has been pointed out. But yes, the short answer to your question is yes, the 6 feet is a big deal, and that needs to be reconciled, I guess, one way or the other. It's the standard we applied when we laid the model out, and it's the standard we've been applying.
And just to say a little bit more about the risk in those transitory situations, I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests that it's total viral load that creates the risk. And so when you have people passing each other for short periods of time, that's a lower risk exposure than when they're sitting there for an hour. And so I think that's another reason to feel comfortable that it's okay if they walk past each other in the halls with masks on for a couple minutes or a couple seconds or whatever. And so it's really that classroom setting, I think. And then, and at 4 feet, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like, we have a lot of evidence that it works at 6, and 4 is not doesn't feel like it will explode off the risk chart.
Can I add on to Jim's risk statement also that I want to point out that the teachers and the staff right now are already seeing every one of these students on a different time scale. By bringing them all in together, we're eliminating some of the touch points those students are having outside of the schools, so that they are actually probably not seeing more transmittable people outside of the school. So it makes it actually less touch points over time.
All right. So I just want to add one more thing, and I bet Mike is going to want to talk. I'm guessing. He hasn't raised his hand, so I don't want to put you on the spot. But I just, I've been throwing out my thoughts here and there, but I just want to kind of wrap up how I view all of this. And when I look at the CDC guidelines, I look at it more as, because there are inconsistencies, I look at it more as a holistic approach. In other words, do this as safely as you can. Here are the things that you can do safely, that equal safely. If there is one that you can't do fully, like distancing, make sure your other ones the other mitigations are really strong. And I think we're doing that, and we can continue to do that. I like, as everybody said, I like the timeline. I think we need some time. I know we need 2 weeks notice for transportation anyway. So this, under no circumstances could it be done sooner than 2 weeks. But I also think we need to get, the lunch issue is something I think parents are really going to be concerned about. So we need to have parents comfortable with what's going to happen at lunch, so that they can decide whether they want their kids to be in goal or full in person. I think, the vaccination of teachers is really important. Not just teachers, let me restate that. The vaccination of all staff, any adult in our building, that's really important. So like a longer leading timeline allows for that. But I also want to bring up the idea that for our kids, the idea that they will at least have some in-person time before the end of school year sets them up for the fall. It makes that transition a little bit better in fall, because if they've only been in hybrid to the end of the school year, that change in the fall will be all that much harder. Katie mentioned little ones. There are some of our kids who are going to high school next year. That is an unbelievable leap right there. And so those 8th graders, every grade needs this. And I'm thinking about also all those transitions: kindergarten to 1st, 2nd to 3rd, 5th to 6th, 8th to high school. If they're not in our buildings at all, or only minimally before the next stage of their schooling starts, I think that'll be really hard for them to transition to the fall. So there is some merit to bringing them in. And if we're looking at an April timeline, I think that gives us enough time to see what happens, see if there's anything that happens between now and then, if variants spread, if we have any other spikes. It gives us time to react to that, because even with the moving to adapted in person, if there are spikes at any time, we might have to pull back to adapted pause. So this gives us some time to watch that as spring break comes and goes. And so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand it over to Mike. So there you go, Mike.
Thank you. And some people may be wondering why I am last. It's because I wanted to be last, and I asked Natalie for the, I guess, privilege of going last. I've spent a lot of time and changed some aspects of my own work life to get to where I am today. A little bit of this is going to be a speech that I have kind of written, as did Katie, because this is such an emotional topic. I think it's easy for any of us to get caught up in our own emotions, because it does affect our kids, our own kids, and our families. So let me start by saying we have a plan. We've worked the plan. We'll continue to work the plan. I want to give enormous thanks to the administrative staff, the principals, the teachers, the lunch ladies, and men. My grandmother was a lunch lady at Abington High School in the Philadelphia area. So there's a special place in my heart for those ladies, for the medical staff, for the sociologists, and everybody else. I don't know that we had a chance to do this. I don't know whether it was Kathy or someone else, but the team that's helping us from Northwest Community Hospital, there are other contributors to vaccination efforts that can't be named right now, that I am aware of, that other board members are aware of. If there's been any reluctance to engage with first responders in our community, it's been out of a desire to allow them to focus on the important tasks that they have at hand, not out of a belief that we know more than you do. That said, if you have time, inclination, or paths to vaccinations for our staff, we would certainly appreciate that feedback. What an unbelievable time we've lived through since last year, probably not since World War II, as our nation dealt with as much sustained uncertainty, fear, and worry for the future. None of your board members could have envisioned the current landscape when we were elected in 2017 and 2019, respectively. Certainly, we were on a path that included a referendum that was successfully passed, as it would turn out. But the last year has been filled with stress, anxiety, and frankly, damaged relationships. Whether on social media or to my face, I'm frequently told that I'm beholden to one entity or another. Let me state clearly, I am not. In combat, I've been shot at by an enemy that wanted to kill me on the battlefield in Iraq. Stress is relative. We are not here for the paycheck. There is none, for those of you wondering. We're not here for the glory. I want to pay a special respect to my fellow board members, and especially our board president, who has certainly never could have imagined she was signing up for an incredibly difficult 2-year term. And I hope that she's remembered for her good grace and amazing ability to navigate these challenging times, because that's what she deserves to be remembered for. The students of our district are an important constituency, but they're not the only one. Teachers are certainly an important constituency, but not the only one. Taxpayers, parents, residents, administrators, janitorial staff, medical and food service staffs are important constituencies, but none of them stand alone. Ours is a dynamic 9-building district with 5,000 students, or nearly. On a personal side, a year ago, I made a commitment to become a licensed substitute teacher in Illinois. I am now licensed and have been a substitute for District 30, Northbrook Glenview. And I've worked in all 3 of their school buildings for 8th, 6th, 4th, and 3rd grades. I share this because my time working with the students, observing their routines and the routines of the teachers and staff, has informed my thinking. The recently updated CDC guidance has also guided my thinking, as have dozens of research papers, news articles, and conversations with health providers that me and my fellow board members have read and undertaken. We have all waited for and hoped for a relaxing of the 6-foot distancing rule from the alphabet soup of agencies guiding our decisions. It has not come. It is now time, in my view, to leverage a mix of common sense with the, quote, when feasible, unquote, guidance from CDC, IDPH, and others. We can do this. We need to do this. Barring a resurgence of the pandemic, it is non-negotiable with me that we fully reopen schools in the fall of 2021. The debate we are having today is not, in my view, about that. Some parents have shared with me that the rest of the school year is already lost, that we should focus on fall 2021. I respectfully disagree. I am of the belief that we should open our school buildings fully to those students and families that desire to send their children to school more than under the current hybrid construct. I believe that we should continue a remote option for those families desiring it. If your family desires to send your children to less than a full-time schedule of classes, say 2 or 3 days a week, then so be it. If we can maintain a very high level of sanitation and cleanliness, and we can open for Wednesday teaching, then we should do so. My thinking along these lines is as follows. We must use the time between now and the end of this current school year to assess each student, to understand their preparedness to move to the next grade level academically, emotionally, and behaviorally. We must use this time to determine whether the COVID-19 slide, in quotes, seen in some demographics is more pronounced than anticipated, and how the district can respond. Mental health, trauma, and other behavioral issues will need to be assessed in all grades. In short, we need this time between now and the end of the school year to be fully prepared to undertake the Herculean effort to get our children ready for the years following the next school year. Teachers will need to teach to a wider set of skills and will need diagnostics on many children to provide quality instructional support. Shifting to a more robust in-building teaching model is not without risk. I recognize and I acknowledge the risk. If we see a spike in cases anywhere in our building populations outside of specific cohorts, we may need to adjust accordingly back to a hybrid model. There are no absolutes here. I feel confident that our students, administrators, teachers, and staff can safely manage the reintroduction of a more robust in-person teaching model successfully. We need the support of our parents and children to continue to honor health and safety best practices to maintain open buildings. We should state that expectations should differ from our educational environment pre-pandemic. It will not be the same. There will be stresses introduced that are unforeseen today. We ask that you be patient as we move towards adjusting our models. I want to state categorically that I believe that this transition is another step on the path that we set when this pandemic hit us nearly a year ago. Time is of the essence. Please leverage all the talent that we have to make this happen. FGM for space planning, Nicholas for procurement, et cetera, et cetera. Buses. If buses reach a safe capacity, then notify parents to give them the option to drive their child in. But more than anything, let's lean in, leverage those resources, grab them, secure them now before every other school district needs them to open their buildings. I have a deep respect for our community and for my fellow board members, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to share this message. And I do hope we have a vote tonight to provide direction to Dr. Deli and the administration. Thank you.
All right, Mike, thanks for those thoughts. Thanks for your kind words. You did refer to me in the past tense, and I just want to point out I'm still here. Don't plan on going anywhere for the next couple years. Let's just say that.
Acknowledged. I meant more in the vein of you have done an amazing job since you have been president.
All right, thanks. Thank you. So you did say something about a vote. We are not going to be taking a vote tonight. It wasn't on our agenda to vote tonight, and we can't add an agenda item and vote on it in the same meeting. But I don't really think we need a vote. We voted on July 27th last year to adopt a plan. We've been implementing the plan, and now we are asking our administration to move to the next level of the plan. As I have, listened to all of my board members speak, it's clear that that's what the majority is asking for. I don't think I've heard from anybody that they don't want to, other than I will acknowledge Diane would like some more information. So we are next.
Always going to want more information, Natalie.
And that's always a good thing. That's what we're here for. That's our role as board members, is to always ask for more information. So thank you for that. Our next meeting is in 3 weeks. So that gives some time for administration to gather some of the information that they need. Although I'm guessing Dane will tell me it's not enough to gather all the information they need. Because this, as we saw from their slides, there are a lot of considerations, but it does set in motion the timeline for an April post-spring break change to the next phase in our plan. I want to let any board members react to that if they want to. If somebody has any objections to what I've just said, please indicate so, because I'm trying to sum up what everybody said and I don't want to misrepresent. All right. So in terms of a vote, Mike, we won't be voting, but we have given, I believe, Dr. Deli and the administrative team what they need to do to proceed further. Am I correct?
Yes, I would add one thing though, and I think it's important that we acknowledge first that there are several dimensions to this that need more work, and hopefully we made that point clear. So I think working within a time frame is going to be important for us. I've heard some board members acknowledge that fact and mention the month of April. So I would actually like to take this a step further and say that if the board is interested in taking this direction, that we do so and activate this on April the 12th, which would be the first full week of adapted in person. And should we discover something that is completely prohibitive in doing so, that I would immediately communicate that with the board.
All right, so April 12th is how many weeks after spring break? That's sort of been our guidepost to spring break.
2 weeks. That's 2 weeks after spring break, right?
All right, So that's sort of the same amount of time we went in adaptive pause after Thanksgiving and after our winter break, correct?
But I just want, we would still be in a hybrid situation for those 2 weeks, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Right.
This would be I'm starting with a proposal because what I don't want to do is begin work on these unsettled issues without knowing what kind of time frame we're dealing with here, because I know some of these things are going to take longer than others. So
What if we phrase it as like a not later than April 12th? I mean, as you do your work, you might uncover like, oh, hey, April 5th is possible, or a week earlier.
Sure.
But it's,
I would only ask, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If we can open K through 2 sooner, logistically, thoughtfully, appropriately, then we should think about doing that. I don't want to hold to a date certain if we have the ability to move things up in a staggered way. It's just one point of view. I'm one point of view, but I don't want us to let that pass without that comment.
Just, I agree with the thought that if it comes down to prioritization, the youngest learners really need priority, our first and second graders. But in addition, I also would like to think of our 8th graders, because they're leaving the schools. They're never going to be there again. And, that's a big thing, to never have been with all of your classmates. And so, if this is the way we're moving forward and we're talking about priorities, I would want priorities to also be on those 8th graders.
I will also add that if we were to start April 12th, just working backwards from the end of school, that gives 7 weeks of full in. I don't know if that matters to anybody, but I'm just letting people know that we have to look at that too, and how much time they're going to have if that was the start date.
I agree with Diane's thinking on 8th grade, and I would say more time is better. Don't let the 12th be a no later than date, I guess is what I'm saying.
And my comment would be, I'm good with April 12th or sooner if staff has substantially been vaccinated. I can't, that just seems to be like one of the important mitigations, in my opinion. And I just want to throw one other thing in here, this is maybe a little out of left field, as once in a while we do as board members. So I don't expect an answer or maybe even a reaction right now. But while we're waiting, while we're moving closer to that April deadline or guidepost, I'm wondering if after school activities could be perhaps expanded, and maybe some thought given to students in goal being able to participate in after school clubs and things like that. Because if kids from hybrid are going to move into goal and they're losing in class time, that perhaps they could at least be with their peers and have some interaction in an after school club that's easier to contain numbers and to distance and to mask and all that. So I'm just throwing that out there for consideration for the administration. And I don't know, that might be a principal level kind of logistical thing, but I felt the need to say that. So.
I would actually agree with the point that, as we take a level, because these are all layers of safety, right? That we're adding, playing with. If we're taking back, and we don't know how it's going to work out, right? I'm still going to go with the optimistic mindset that it could be that there's 6 feet actually when we get the numbers. But in the event that it's not, if we're scaling back on that layer of protection, I would love to see the added layer of protection for our staff and teachers that they are vaccinated. And if we can do anything, and I know everyone's been trying, so I'm not suggesting that anyone's not, but if there's anything else we can do, and please let us know if we can help. Just make that happen, because I would like to see them protected. Thank you.
And I also want to just make a plea to the community to continue to do good mitigation outside the schools. We have not seen any transmission of COVID within our schools, and that's because of all the work that parents are doing outside of schools. So we got to continue to do that over these next 12 weeks of school.
Well said, Scott. Has everybody had a chance to say everything that they wanted to say on this very important topic?
I'm sorry, just for my clarity. I'm leaving with an understanding that we are working toward the 12th. If conditions are such that a clear path to this emerges sooner than that, that we would communicate that. Is that fair to say?
I think that sums it up perfectly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have come to the end of this particular discussion item, but we have one more discussion item, and that is staffing allocations for the 2021-22 school year, which is related to the topic we've just been discussing. And I will turn it over to Dr. Hopkins.
Thank you. The format of my memo outlining our staffing needs for 21-22 very much follows the same patterns of data mining that we have used for many years now. I think what we'll see that's slightly different this year is that we are following up on a middle school initiative that was raised by the Time and Learning Task Force about the schedule at the middle school. And the middle school administrators and schools spent time in previous years looking at how can they maximize the time in the day for middle schoolers. And in fact, presented to the board last April about adjustments they'd like to make with the master schedule that both middle schools use to optimize learning for students. And this year, during the 2021 school year, they have implemented part of that plan, which gives more time to some subjects in order to boost learning in those areas, to provide more time for learning in some of those subject areas. So they came back to say, well, we have been doing more work, as we had shared in April, to finalize the plan for our schedule. And this schedule involves what's referred to, this component of the scheduling involves what's referred to as the A blocks, which will soon become known as Encore if the board so approves it. And their goal in looking at the A blocks this year was to actually increase the amount of exploration that students at the middle level can do, including some explorations involving STEM, as well as implement more choice for middle schoolers. Because right now they have a set schedule that they follow in terms of the fine arts that they're going to be exposed to, how often and when in each of the years. This would actually provide them some choice because it would increase the number of those classes, which we're now referring to as Encore. Because if we look at the trends in populations overall for the district for the last 10 years to what the demographic company that we work with is projecting for really for the next 5 years, their projections you see kind of then remain static at beginning in the 6th year. Because it's hard after this year to have a complete confidence in a 10-year projection since we've not lived through a pandemic before. And so we're seeing a less than 20 student difference in overall district population. So that amounts to 2 to 3 students per building. So then why aren't we seeing, very similar staffing numbers for next year? And it's accounted for mostly because of the staffing that would be needed to implement the final phase of the middle school schedule adjustments. And so those are noted on the certified staff sheet, which is a big spreadsheet that's all on one page. They're highlighted in orange, the components that would be needed to implement the middle school staffing additions, which total approximately 6 FTE in total, a little over, to make these changes. It also impacts band and orchestra being taught during the day, not during the overture period. The overture period would still be in place for chorus because the chorus director cannot be, as much as maybe STEM can figure it out, be in 2 places at once. Teaching during the day chorus while also teaching general music at the same time cannot happen. So that will occur in overture, while band and orchestra will occur during the day. That's large group and small group lessons. They may from time to time take advantage of the overture period, maybe for a preparation for a concert, things like that. But the bulk of students' band and orchestra instruction would occur during the day in this model as well. So that called for a small change in our band and orchestra staffing. They will be making a presentation to the board, so they're not leaving you out of all the fine juicy details when it comes to middle school scheduling. They'll do that in April. But first we wanted to share with you what it would mean in terms of staffing. So it's a slight increase overall because we would have seen actually a little bit of a decrease in staffing. I also put on the staffing sheets that are the two final sheets in the memo, what we included for COVID this year. They weren't part of the staffing allocation. We did use contingency in some respects for some of the additional staffing that we hired this year, both certified and support. But I just wanted to keep them kind of on the record that we did have them this year and that we'll wait for direction in terms of whether or not any of that needs to continue next year. And then finally, we made a little bit of change in our accounting for what we have typically done in terms of contingency for certified staff. I would always try to highlight for you where we believe we may be seeing an increase needed in staffing should, because some sections are so close to going beyond the class targets that we hit, we have based a contingency number on that. How many, which class at a primary building or intermediate or middle school is so close to the number of students needed to actually have an additional teacher appointed. And it's been our history to provide you that number of kind of an emergency FTE that we may need, which we refer to as contingency. That contingency is really has a lot of oversight by Dr. Deli, because we do a lot of conferencing with the administrators involved in those schools to determine, is this the best approach to managing students once the school year has started, to add another teacher, because obviously that would involve reconfiguration of classes. And so we look at what's the best methodology. So this year, you'll note, I do have a column, a final column on the right on the certified staff sheet that shows where we may need additional staffing. What's different this year is that we've also highlighted EL teachers, English learner teachers, because we are still a little bit in limbo with regard to testing that our students typically go through in the spring that help us identify, are any of our English learners ready to transition out of getting that specific or higher level of support. We're not sure at this point what that number is going to look like. So instead of seeing students exited out from EL services, they may remain in longer due to what happens with the testing, whether it's in place, whether it's changed, whether thresholds change, because we don't have that information yet from the federal government. And we don't know, we do know that the state is going to apply for a waiver regarding some testing. What will that mean for student placements and student supports? So we wanted to account for that both in EL, and we always account for the potential that we may need an additional learning behavior specialist or special ed teacher, because we don't know, again, what the population will really look like at the start of the school year. So all of that, again, is identified in green in that right column. If we should find that we do need additional staff then once the school year has started, or potentially over the summer, we would come to the board again and lay out why we think this additional staffing would be needed, what we've done to really look at that situation in the best way possible for the students, and in what's a reasonable way to implement any additional staffing that we're doing that will really have an impact on students and learning. So I don't want to read the memo to you, though I'm sure my dulcet tones would get you ready for sleep. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the staffing memo.
Does anybody?
I do have, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just asking if anybody had questions, so go ahead, Jim.
This is more about if for next year, if there's a feeling like we need to still offer a goal, which feels like a realistic possibility to at least plan for, how does that impact the staffing allocation? Does it just, are we just able to rearrange the deck and make that work, or does it actually add more staff on top of what you're projecting here?
That's a great question, Jim. And it really comes down to numbers in terms of the students who would opt for, actually their parents would opt for a goal setting. Because theoretically this year, we should have been able to, by repurposing staff between goal and our other 8 schools, been able to manage the staffing for goal. But goal became the largest school in the district. Mm-hmm. And beyond what we could have used just in terms of repurposing our staff. And that's why then we had to hire additional staff for goal. So it was dependent upon how many students we have in that 9th school. And I'm assuming that that's going to be similar to the coming year. One last comment about the projections that we're using. It takes into account a pre-pandemic population, because if we look at the projections for this current school year, what they projected we would have and what we actually have is off by a greater margin than we've ever seen. We had a number of families identified that they were not coming to the district after all, and it was related to COVID. But we have the belief that many of those families will return. We asked the demographers to work up such a scenario, and that's the scenario we're moving forward with.
Okay.
Very long
Does that answer your question, Jim?
I think so. It sounds like maybe we could need more staff than what's in this projection, but it's also possible that you could just rearrange based on how big it is. Really,
Right.
maybe.
We started with the belief, yeah, we did even start with the beliefs this year that was going to be kind of an even trade by moving staff around, and it was that goal became even more popular as a choice than we had anticipated.
Okay, Katie?
Just a quick note, and some of you may already know this, but there are also families I know that chose goal because of consistency pieces. But if we were open full time, they would have and will choose that because they couldn't handle the different schedules. So you're going to have, obviously, some people might choose to go into goal from hybrid. You're going to have some people that are going to choose to go from goal out because now there's a consistent schedule.
I think the timing of families registering when the district is ready to open that registration, should things, the situation in our society change over the summer and spring, I think that will be key in helping HR get ahead to really identify what are our true staffing needs now that we have kind of a plan for the fall and know what types of instructional settings we need to provide. We are required to provide an online setting during the pandemic for the students who require that type of setting.
Right.
So it's likely that we'll be offering some version of goal next year. The numbers, that's the big, I need my crystal ball for.
Sure.
Good question.
Right. I have a question, and then I'll go to you, John. Do you feel like your contingencies, and maybe this is actually for you and Dr. Daly, do your contingencies allow for extra staff to respond to dealing with the social emotional impact of this last year and of COVID and everything that, we might need more social workers or whatever, or speech pathologists or, interventionalists or whatever. Did you feel like you're comfortable that those contingencies could address that? Or are you going to revisit that closer to?
The contingencies don't necessarily address that. I do believe that some of the work that Mary's been doing over the last couple of years to look at how we really staff our schools with mental health professionals has us in a good position to support our students during this very challenging time. And by that, I mean specifically that we have more psychologists in our schools than we've ever had before. And that we're really looking at what type of personnel do we need in order to support students during, complicated times and now even more complicated times. So I think that we've been planning all along, but does the specific staffing here provide any additional contingency? It does not. You'll be happy to note that as the middle school principals were planning for next year in terms of that schedule, they were really fantastic and also considering the impact of the students not being in person this year and what that would need to look like. They took that into account in terms of their implementation of new scheduling if you approve the staffing, how they would then stage it and use that opportunity to really look at how are students doing, given that they had such a very unusual year this year.
Okay. Oh, can I respond just a little, Natalie? We are working on our MTSS, our multi-tiered systems of support, to be a responsive system. And so all children will need extra SEL support. So we're trying to help all of our staff members learn how to respond to post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic growth, and helping our students within their tier 1 classroom. So not necessarily adding clinical staff who will work with children with more specific needs, but more global needs that many of our students will experience.
I'm not surprised to hear that.
And I would just also say, having said that, if there's a need that presents itself, we will bring that to you with a supporting rationale if we think something in particular needs to be done that involves FTE.
Yeah, and I think you'll have strong board support for that, because I think we're all keenly concerned about those issues, about supporting students going forward. So, all right, I'm sorry, John, you had a question.
I guess it's more of a word of appreciation for Dr. Hopkins. This very thorough report. You know, under the best of times, we have trouble getting this number right. And we are not under the best of times. So, but you know, I think we've taken as good a shot as we can. But I guess I just wanted to point out to Kathy, I think something is wrong with the Zoom. For some reason, the number of participants is way down for this discussion as opposed to the other item.
And this is
I don't understand why.
This is the best part. I don't understand it either. But
Let's
thank
get
you.
tech support on that.
And we'll continue to work. I'll continue to refine the data and the placements of staff between now and the March 15th board meeting. As you'll note in the memo, I did note that it's likely we will have to do a reduction in force. We're trying to keep that number as low as possible, but I won't have the final number until the March board meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, the final item on our discussion agenda is following meeting agenda. Our next meeting is in 3 weeks, March 15th. And I think we already have some idea of what's going to be discussed. Things will be added, the agenda will be populated. Does anybody have any question about next meeting's agenda? All right, seeing none, we can move on to the second and final opportunity tonight for audience comments. Just to recap, anyone wishing to address the board needs to register on our website. Our Director of Communications, Kathy Kajijian, will read your name and your connection to the district and will then bring you onto the screen. Please make sure your full name is visible so that she can find you. Remember, the board will be in listening mode only. Again, we remind all speakers to conduct themselves with respect and civility. All right, Kathy, are you ready?
Yes, we have Nanette Ross Meredith, staff member.
All right.
Here comes Nan.
One
Okay,
moment.
we see you, but we don't hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Now we can, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, 1 second, please. Sorry, my screen went. There we go. Good evening. My name is Nanette Ross Meredith, and I am currently the president of the Glenview Education Association. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the GEA Executive Board, Katie Beck, Susan Clark, Katie Konieczka, and Kathy Carter, and our 436 certified colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to share our thoughts. I have been an educator in District 34 for 20 years. Along with my colleagues in the GEA, we have devoted our all toward the education of children, all while supporting their social emotional needs. Our whole hearts are invested in this community and the success of students in District 34. We appreciate the thoroughness and transparency of the administration's presentation. While there have been challenges, as to be expected in a pandemic, the plan put in place this year for movement between learning models as needed has been very successful. The fact that there has been no in-school transmissions is a testament to the commitment of our staff and the rigor of the plan that is currently in place. We all would love to have more in-person time with our students. We understand and value the emotional and psychological needs of the children. At this time, adapted in person would go against the recommendations of the CDC and the current plan from the administration. While we are in the orange zone, a move to adapted in person is not safe for our staff and students or recommended by the CDC without the following mitigation measures firmly in place: 6 feet social distancing, all students wearing a mask, and proper cleaning and sanitation of classrooms and common areas in the buildings. Clearly, full-time in-person should not even be a consideration due to our place in the COVID zone and the CDC recommendations for mitigation. Furthermore, the current availability of vaccine does not meet the needs of our teachers and staff. The energy and funding required to move to adapted in-person at this time would pull from the available resources needed for fall planning and to ensure a robust start to the 21-22 school year. It seems abundantly clear that at this time, it would be in everyone's best interest to continue with the plan that is currently in place until the end of this school year. This would allow for thoughtful and science-based planning for the start of 21-22. We hope that we will begin the next school year in person. However, the scourge of the pandemic will not be over. We need to devote our energies towards meeting the needs of the students based on science and guidance from the CDC. What we have known as normal is not what we will be returning to. We must plan for future challenges and assess what we have learned during this time to decide what can best serve us going forward. District 34 has always taken the time and data-based approach to every important decision. This decision is one of the most important decisions facing our students, families, community, and staff. We know that this time is a challenge for all parties, and the best way through this is together. Thank you for your time and commitment to the safety of students and staff.
All right. Thank you, Nan. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. All right, Kathy, who is next?
Next, we have Tom Kiesau. I am not seeing him on the attendee list. So, Dr. Alpamodi.
All right, Dr. Modi, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I just want to say thank you to the board and thank you to the administration. I was listening to the presentation as well as many other parents, and I think a lot of us were getting very riled up and upset, but listening to the board comments has put us at very much so at ease. We're very happy that you're going to adapt the 6 feet to be when feasible and make it around 3 to 4. I do have to say though, the whole lunch process thing, I don't know why we're not looking into barriers that we can purchase. I think one of the other physicians on the site, Dr. Nisha Patel, had mentioned that you can get these barriers for $13. The other concern I have is these vaccines. I'm very thankful that there was a physician in the community who was able to get the vaccines for our teachers. I'm sure the district also helped in doing this. And I'm hoping that we can get these teachers vaccinated, all the teachers vaccinated before we hopefully open up before April 12th. And then there was this whole comment about how the scores, the NEWA testing MAP scores, kids did well. I think that the teachers are doing a great job, but a lot of parents have had to supplement their children's educations with tutors. And that may be a reason why the kids have been doing so well. The other thing we have to remember is that everyone's so focused on the 6 feet, but let's also remember that it's less than 6 feet with a barrier is still considered distancing. And if you're exposed, a close contact with less than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes is what's considered close contact exposure. The other comment I have to say is that Dr. Deli had talked about this adapted in-person plan. If the board voted on this in July, why is there a plan not already in place? I understand that planning has to take place, but why has the planning not already been set? Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Modi. Kathy, who is next?
Is Lauren Singer. Lauren is here.
I think you're muted, Lauren. So we're not hearing you. But I see your square. So I know you're there. Still not hearing you.
We'll come back to Lauren.
Okay, who's next?
Kirby Murphy. All right.
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Great. So I would just like to echo the other healthcare workers that have expressed their concern and desire based on science to have our kids in full day learning. You know, I'm so pleased to hear that the board has, you know, come together and has decided that the, you know, kids being in person is really of the utmost priority. I do not understand why it's going to take 7 weeks to get our kids back in person. You just said that it would take approximately 2 weeks for a change. I understand, you know, that having them in 2 weeks might be difficult, but I am, you know, very discouraged and ashamed that we haven't been planning for this from the beginning. There should be a plan in place and should have been a plan in place to have these kids back in full person learning prior to now. And it shouldn't take 7 weeks to get them back in. I think everyone agrees that kids learn better in schools. You know, Wednesdays are not powerful. Somebody had said, and I apologize, I don't know the gentleman in the position that he's in, said that Wednesdays are powerful. I can attest that they are not. There's a complete disconnect on what the intentions are for this day versus what is actually happening. My children, and I have 2 of them in the elementary schools, there's no breakout rooms, there's no small group discussions. We're having snack time 15 minutes into our Zoom calls. I don't understand why at minimum, the Wednesdays in person can't be changed in your 2-week time frame that you call for a change. I'm happy to hear, like I said, that the board wants these kids back in person. I think that we can do better than 7 weeks from now and have them in for more than 7 weeks, you know, until the end of the year. My other point is, you know, as far as the exposure piece, you know, that you need to look up what constitutes an exposure, which Dr. Modi just spoke to. I appreciate the time. And I hope that, you know, we can get them back in within, you know, at minimum, the 7-week time frame.
Okay. All right, thank you, Kirby. Kathy, who is next?
Vikas Patel, another parent. Okay.
All right, I think you can.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for letting me speak. Thank you guys. I think all of you have been doing an awesome job this year, kind of rolling with the punches with COVID. I'm an emergency room doctor. My wife is a family practice doctor, so you know, we knew pretty early on that this was gonna change our lives in a substantial way. And we didn't know what to expect early on. Things have evolved significantly since then, and I'm hoping that, you know, some of the words that I heard tonight were very encouraging from the standpoint of, you know, we are going to use science and learn from what the experience has been in real time and try to move forward. But the goal, I think, is for everyone to get these kids back in school. What we're doing currently is just not sustainable. And my fear of COVID and of transmission has changed significantly over the last year. We don't experience positivity in hospital settings because we take pretty simple precautions and precautions that our kids are completely willing to take. All of my children are young. They're all, you know, 4th grade and younger, but they sit down and they wear their masks. They go play outside with their friends with masks on, and they come inside and they'll be playing for an hour inside before a parent steps in and says, hey, you can take your mask off now. You're inside with our family. This is something that I feel like we're not really addressing. The 6 feet distancing thing that the CDC says, there's no doubt that 6 feet distancing is an ideal situation, but it is not what is necessary, because we're proving it every day in hospital settings. We wear simple surgical masks. Of course, when we're doing invasive procedures, we're wearing N95s or better, but for day in, day out, taking care of COVID patients, I'm wearing just a simple surgical mask, having lengthy conversations with patients without getting infected. It's been over a year and I have not been infected with COVID. And kids are not the primary source of infection. So something has to be done here where we're actually taking real world experience, combining it with what's actually science, and coming up with a better plan than what we have right now. And I hope that somehow we're able to do this properly. The case positivity rate that you guys are quoting, it's the CDC data is old. We are at currently in Cook County, we are at all of Cook County, not suburban Cook County, but all of Cook County. We are at 2.74% case positivity rate. We are currently, as a state, at below the 50 per 100,000. Right now, I calculated the numbers myself tonight for this meeting. We're at 15.74 cases per 100,000. That's our statewide positivity rate right now. Something has to give. Like, I understand the data from the CDC is a little bit delayed. And so
3 minutes.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Patel, we have to try to keep everybody to the same time limit.
I understand.
But thank you for your comments. All right, Kathy, who is next?
Okay, next is Corey Moore.
Hi, Corey, we can see you.
Can you hear me?
And we can hear you.
Awesome. I won't take up much time. I just wanted to thank the board for continuing to keep the Board of Education meeting virtually. It is really accessible for the community, and I hope that you consider making this still be a part of how you reach the community going forward. I also just wanted to say that special education is not special treatment. And I want to thank the district specifically for your continued work with kids with IEPs, with 504s, kids in our dual language, our English language learners, and our at-risk students. The attention and detail that the district has worked on with those children has really, truly made a difference. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thanks. Have a good night.
All right, thank you, Corey. Kathy, who's next?
Okay, Mary Beth Dar. It does not look like she is on.
Okay.
Rebecca Sobolewski. Rebecca, here we go.
We see your square, but we can't hear you. I think you're
Can you
muted.
hear me?
Oh, now we can. Yep, go ahead, please.
I just have a couple of comments, many of which mirror the board's previous statements. And I would just like to thank the board members for their desire to move the kids back in person full time. It's much appreciated and overdue. I would just like to point out that if the staff are all vaccinated, which they will have had the opportunity for come the fall of 2021, you should not have the staffing pool issues that you used as a reason for concern for in-person learning last fall. I think if a staff member does not feel comfortable getting the vaccine, then they are no longer able to use that as an excuse for not coming to school in person. As a healthcare provider, whether you have chosen to get vaccinated or not, you're expected to be at work in person every day. And we have been for the entire year. You are essential workers, and I think school is a right for these children. The issues you bring up about busing, I think, could easily be solved if you just merely reach out to parents. I think many would find a way to get their kids to school themselves without the use of the bus if that meant their kid could be in person all day, every day. I, for one, would be happy to give up my children's spot on the bus if that helped the greater good of our kids, getting them in person full time. And I think we all want our students and staff to be safe. There are several ways to be safe in person at the same time, as proven by our current hybrid mode. It sounds like a major hurdle to the administration feeling comfortable with full-time in-person learning are the eating lunch issues, as well as the 6 feet when able. And as many have said, I think an easy fix to this is by utilizing barriers. Plexiglass partitions can be used in between students and staff, and I'd be happy to personally fund outfitting my child's classroom or donating to a fund to be used throughout the district. I don't think you need to restructure all these classrooms. I think you just need to consider the use of barriers. I don't think this needs to be made more difficult than it needs to be. It's not rocket science. And I think the community is full of highly motivated, resourceful parents who are willing to do anything to get their children into the classroom. I think we need to please call on them. Please use their ideas and suggestions. Please start focus groups now. Please tell us what we can do to help. We're begging to be involved in school decision-making. We're begging to help create a safe solution, and we all want to be part of the solution. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. Kathy, who's next?
Bonnie Kearns, a citizen of District 34.
Hello, hi there.
Yep, we hear you. Please go ahead.
Oh, great. Okay, I tried to start my video, but it didn't work. Yeah, so look, in the past, I have listened to these board meetings for 10 months now. My kids are in private school in Glenview. I pay so much in taxes to fund D34. I'm curious, one, have they entertained at all any sort of refund for the time that the kids were not in school back to the property tax owners that paid for this really wonderful school system that's not delivering? Two, I really wish Dr. Hopkins would have just sent a simple survey out to figure out how many people are coming back to the classroom before she spent 20 slides on how we can't based on 6 feet. You guys don't even know how many kids you're working with. This is 10, 11 months into this. To hear Dr. Deli say we need more time is exhausting. My kids have been in private school since August, and the reason why it's exhausting, people are infuriated, is because it is literally happening in every single school district around us. District 34 lives on an island, and you guys feel like it's this warped energy that just affects your school. And Nanette, the teachers union head who spoke, maybe Nanette shouldn't teach if she's afraid of going back to school. I'm trying to be respectful, but if I was afraid of people eating and drinking, I wouldn't work in a restaurant. That wouldn't be my line of work. You cannot teach virtually. That is not a solution for people that are afraid to teach for the rest of their lives. And possibly if we would have spent the energy on the slides tonight about how we can't do it, if we would have refocused all of those slides and all of these professionals you bring in here on getting these teachers vaccinated, it'd be done by now. There are acquisitions of billion-dollar corporations that have been done under a year, and you guys cannot figure this out. It is simple. You're making it way harder than it has to be. It is so disappointing. I walk my kid to school every day, and I pass by these other kids staring at me outside of their window next door to me. And I'm waving to them. And my kid's killing it in school. And I'd like to see the private kids' schools and the public kids that are back to school test against the kids that have been e-learning this year. And let's see those MAP scores at the end of the year. And by the way, the people who have probably done well in those MAPs, everyone I know has tutors, everything. I'm sure I'm running out of time. But this is a disgrace. This is exhausting. This is a year. And if I have to hear another defense of the teachers, I would love one board meeting for just every slide to be about the families and the students. That would be a miracle. You don't need 7 weeks.
You
don't even need 2 weeks. Stop the excuses. Please get these kids back. We're begging you. Doctors on this call are begging you. Thank you.
Next.
Who's next?
Danielle Scharf. Oops,
That was the 3 minutes from the last. All right.
Danielle Scharf.
Okay. Danielle, we see your lovely piece of art. Oh, now we hear your voice.
Oh, great. And I'm here. Oh, and you can see me too. Hi, everybody. Thank you first and foremost so much for all of the work and time and effort. And holy cow, it's a late night, so I will keep this very, very short. But I did want to just go on the record saying thank you for everybody's work. And that being said, I just also wanted to remind everybody, you know, we all want I heard everybody say this evening that we all want our kids to have more time in school. Our teachers want more time in school. Our administrators want more time in school. The parents want more time for our kids in school. We all do. So that being said, knowing that we all have this overarching goal of common goal, you know, in mind, you know, and that we are a community, a really awesome community at that. I just want to remind everyone, you know, to lead with love and to remember that we're all, you know, working together really to do the best for our community. And I just also wanted to thank you too with the emphasis on mental health component moving forward. And I just wanted to give a highlight of, I'm really concerned of not only the mental health of our students, but also of our staff and of our teachers. And so I really do want money to be appropriated for extra resources in those areas so that we can, you know, really move forward with the best of our abilities. We've all suffered a really hard year, and we're going to need some real extra support, not just in staffing, but in programming as well. So thank you so much again for all of you guys have done. I really appreciate it. Have a great night.
All right. Thank you, Danielle. Kathy, who's next?
Let's see. Next is Jennifer Savage. Does not look like she is here.
Don't forget about Lauren Singer. We were going to go back to her.
Yeah, why don't we see Lauren? All right, Lauren.
All right, we see your square.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you this time.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I was actually dealing with my son. Okay, so I'm just going to make it kind of quick. I'm a nurse anesthetist. I've been working with this for months and months. And in the very beginning, I was absolutely willing, sit back, let's see, let's let everyone else be the guinea pig. But it's been a year, and it's been a really long year. And I just want to say thank you to our teachers and to the board for actually like representing our community. I think it's really important that you guys are hearing us and speaking for us, because you guys are our voices right now. I'm going to echo kind of what Dr. Modi, Dr. Patel, Kirby Murphy said, and Bonnie, thank you for your honesty. You said a lot of what a lot of us were thinking, but I am happy to hear that we're going to be returning. But what I do kind of fear is that there isn't a plan. To hear Dr. Deli say that we don't have a plan and we need more time to plan. Like in July, you came up with this plan. It should have been step A, B, C, and D ready to go when it was ready. And it's like super discouraging. I watched my first grader like cry that he wants to go to another school because his friends go to school and he doesn't. Like, he's a smart kid. When we're in person, he's happy and thrilled, but it's really like letting our littlest learners down. I have a 7th grader. She can manage. It's not great, but she can manage on her own. A 1st grader absolutely requires someone sitting with him and teaching him. And as far as test scores, like, I'm sorry, but like, I have a really hard time hearing that. I have a tutor for my son as well, and that's made a huge difference. And it's not because our teachers aren't doing their job. It's because there's not enough time in person. And as a working mom and a working parent, we need the extra help. So test scores to me, like, that is really disappointing to hear. And I get that we're all trying to be positive, but that's not a fair way to go about it. So with 3 months left, I really want to know, what is the plan for the fall? I want to guarantee that our children get an in-person education this fall, whatever it takes. Like, you have a community full of resources and parents willing to help myself and some other parents have found barriers, $13 a kid. I'm willing to pay for myself, my kid, donate. I'm sure if we ask. It's also really disappointing to hear that like we don't have a parent survey to know how many people are coming in and out at the time. Like we should have that data. If we knew that our numbers are getting better and that's a possibility, could have been done in January, could have been done at the beginning. If you are in person or if you're in goal, would you want to be full-time in person? I just think we need to get ahead of the ball, and I think we need to act instead of react. And I think that that is something that would be really helpful for all of us to know what the plan is moving forward. I think that that is it.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks.
Kathy, who's next?
Next, I lost my spreadsheet here. Scott Steele.
Okay.
Does not look like he is still on the call. Whitney Langus.
All right, Whitney, I think you're, oh,
I'm
there you
muted.
go. There you go.
Okay.
Yes, Whitney, you're good.
I'm really taken aback by some of the comments I've heard tonight, and that wasn't actually what I was planning on saying. What I really want to say is thank you. Thank you to our board for speaking tonight. It was awesome to hear everybody's thought process. That helps all of us sitting at home or understand how we're coming to these decisions. I really appreciate that. I also appreciate the board and the volunteering you're doing for our community. As someone that volunteers a lot and also gets a little bit skewered every now and then, I can imagine how each and every one of you are feeling at times. So I just want you to know that I and many others do appreciate your work. To our administration as well. I know this has been a hard year. I can't even imagine what it's like to get up every day and hear some of the things that parents are saying to you. And I just wanted to try to end a little bit on a positive note here, just to say that maybe I'm an optimist, and I always am. I have a middle schooler, and I have 3.5-year-old twins. I have a little bit of a different perspective than some people in that they are on just such a different end of the spectrum here. And I can see the importance of being in person. Obviously, we all want it safely. But I do want our administration and our board to call upon our community, which I do believe has a heart. I do believe we are people that want to help out in any way, shape, or form that we can. And I appreciate the smart parents and professionals, the stay-at-home parent, the working parents, all of us. I think we all have something to bring here. So that's really what I wanted to say, that I'm all in all proud of the work that we're doing. And it hasn't been perfect. But I do believe we can move forward and hopefully put most of this behind us and learn a few things as well. So thank you for the time. Have a good evening. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Whitney.
Sure.
All right, Kathy, who's next?
Tracy Kellner.
Okay. Hi again, Tracy.
Hi, me again. I'm still here, falling asleep, but still here. Thank you again. I mean, that presentation was unbelievable, and my mind is just like, now it's all on paper, and it's just insane how much work goes into it. So thank you for all that. I just had a couple things, just piggybacking off of Diane's comment about the 8th graders, looking into, if you can get kids back into school sooner, the 8th graders, but also those 5th graders and 2nd graders, they're changing the schools too, not going to high school, but fifth grade to middle school is a big jump. Also, like my middle schooler, we signed up for Goal because the 2 day of going back and forth was just too much for her. So my question really is, you know, we chose Goal just for that reason, but if middle school is going back to more full days, I would be interested in switching back. Is that something that could possibly happen, or you're set in Goal and that's it? And then love the idea of those after school activities for people that are in Goal to come back to school. That's a great way of bringing them back. And there was one more thing, but now I can't remember. Sorry, I think that's it. Again, just that Wednesday, I forgot who said it, but I mean, Wednesdays are just really hard days as far as, you know, a kid that has some special needs and, you know, special education. Just, you know, I'm the teacher for that. There are no breakout rooms. There's no minutes that she's getting. It's just tough. The classes are longer and she has to sit longer with no breaks and just jumping from one class to another. And it's tough. And she gets the anxiety of being in a Zoom with 25 kids opposed to 12 kids. So that's just, you know, going back to those Wednesday thoughts. But thank you again. It's such a late night. Don't want to take up anyone else's time. So thank you for all the information.
All right. Thank you, Tracy. Kathy, do we still have people waiting to talk to us? Can I just ask out of curiosity, how many people do we have still signed up? Just so we can have some idea.
4, 5, 6.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to say that 6 is fine. I say if we go past 11, it's diminishing returns. So hopefully we can get 6 people in before 11.
Natalie, if it's not too much to ask, could we do a 5-minute bio break? Or just on our own? I don't care, but I just didn't want us all leaving at the same time.
In order to do that, we'd have to take a vote and then come back. And if you want to do that.
No, it's not necessary, but I do know that Tom Kiesau does want to speak.
So in other words, let's call on Tom next. Okay, we got the hint. Kathy, could we put Tom next?
We can, Tom. Okay.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
All right. Well, the downside of these things being in person is that I can't hug Bonnie because her comment was exactly what I want to say. I think she hit the nail on the head. That we're talking about this like it's a mission to Mars and all the things we can't do that would make it really hard to do it, and therefore we can't do it. Yet when you say we're going to put a man on the moon, we put a man on the moon, right? We need to actually solve for the problem at hand, not come up with reasons we can't do it. To Dr. Patel's point, the 85 out of 100,000 would suggest we're having over 10,000 new cases a day, which we're not, right? It's reported every day on IDPH. It's in the low 1,000s right now. The number, there's a lot going on here. I want to echo to the board. I greatly appreciate what all of you guys have said and what you're doing. You're speaking on behalf of what I think most of the community expects, and I think you're doing a great job. I am disappointed in the administration. This is not something that was unforeseen. The storyline was obvious where we're going the whole time of 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. That is not what any of us are arguing about. That is not what anyone here is saying, that this could be done in 6 feet. It is completely missing the point. It says they don't understand what we're asking. The only thing that disappoints me more than the administration is what I just heard from the Glenview Educators Association, where things like vaccines aren't available. They are available. A parent in this community got access as soon as they were asked. Many of us, myself included, have offered access. We can do it. We have ample information, capability, but we have not been given any avenue to give those pieces of support. And also, from an educator saying 6 feet, 6 feet, reading comprehension is something that's pretty important. 6 feet, if permissible, if permissible. That is a central point of the CDC guidelines. It is a central point of the IDPH guidelines. It is a central point of everything around this. This is not a black and white issue that it's 6 feet, period, and we're going to let all the damage go along with it. There is there is some risk of anything, any interaction anywhere. There is some risk to sending our kids to school for any reason. We all realize that. We're saying put the mitigation standards in place. And please ask us for help. Our parents are here to help, put the communities to work, listen to your healthcare workers. This is what all of us in the healthcare industry do every single day. Just like we trust all of you for your educational experience, trust us. These are our children. So when you say that we might not know what we're talking about, there are kids. We know, we work in this industry. So thank you. Bonnie, if I ever get to meet you, I owe you a beverage. That was exceptionally well said. Thank you.
All right, Kathy, who's next?
Okay, Mary Hoyland is not still here. Sorry about that. Jules Desseborg. Jules is here.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you to the board. Taking the facts presented about adaptive in-person at face value, I believe any proposal that would involve changing a child's teacher midstream during a school year should be dead before arrival. And adaptive in-person at 6 feet distance, it features exactly that. Several students losing their teacher they've had for 3/4 of this school year. So adaptive in-person at 6 feet should not be considered at all, I believe. With that, I ask the administration and ask each and every board member to more and further fully explain why 3 feet to 4 feet of distancing is a sufficiently safe idea. And any citing of an unreliable organization like the WHO, and I know I'm being picky here on one example, but there have been a few out there, is not good enough. I expect more from each and every board member and from the administration on a key question such as this 3 feet to 4 feet question. I'll add that I do concur with others who are asking the district to utilize the community even more. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Jules, for that very efficient comment. Kathy.
Laura Coleman.
Hey, Laura, we see you.
There we go.
Come back.
Hi. I just, I don't want to be long. I gotta say, I'm having a lot of feelings right now. And honestly, you guys, I just want to apologize for some of the stuff you've had to listen to tonight. I just don't understand, honestly, why people are under the opinion that you guys are somehow out to get our kids and that you're on purpose keeping our children out of school. That's not the case. That's never been the case. And as far as I'm concerned, I've heard the plan. I understand that there's a plan. The only reason why it hasn't been implemented is because we've been in flux this entire time. Did anybody in July actually think that at this point in time, we were going to be where we were? No, not really, because we were all still kind of learning and learning our way about it. So again, I apologize. I'm like beside myself with some of the shit that I've heard tonight. Excuse me, beep. I can't. I'm sorry. I appreciate you all. This has been a really long night. You guys should all be canonized. Thank you very, very much for all of your work. And I look forward to next steps. So thank you very, very much.
All right. Thank you, Laura. I just want to remind everybody to please try to refrain from using any kind of swear words or vulgar words. I know she didn't mean to, but let's try not to do that.
And that, I believe, that was the last comment. The other person is not here. So.
All right. Well, I guess I didn't need to say that because we're ending our portion of audience comments tonight.
For the record, my Navy brain didn't hear the bad word, but I did hear canonization, and I am as far from that as possible.
All right, Mike, we're not supposed to comment, so I'm not going to comment on that. All right, let's move on, shall we? We have just a little bit of business left to do, and that is our reports. We have 6 reports tonight. The FOIA report, the NSSED board meeting report, the budget status report, the current year financial projections, referendum expense report, and the NCISC audit report. Does anybody have any questions? I just want to take one moment, I know it's a long night, to just briefly mention the NCIS report, which summarizes the recently conducted compliance review done on our district. These reviews are done about every 4 years, and it requires a lot of time and effort on behalf of our administration. And it's my pleasure to say that through their hard work, we earned the designation of full compliance. And I'm going to quote from the report. They say, "Congratulations on being great stewards of public education in your community." So on behalf of the board, I want to congratulate our entire district and our administrative team for the work they did to earn that. So anybody who wants to learn more about this can read the summary of the report, which is posted on board docs. So our final item on tonight's agenda is other business. Does anyone on the board have any other business they'd like to bring forward? All right, seeing none, may I have a motion and a second to adjourn tonight's meeting?
I move to adjourn the meeting. Mike Corman.
Second, John Aggie.
All right, this is a voice vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you to our administrative team and to my fellow board members. I hope you guys have a restful sleep tonight. Good night.
Good night, everybody.